It's episode 3. Yeah. 3
It's
of a
episode
perfect beat. Discipline beat of a pair. What should we call this, by the way?
Oh, I had a name for this one.
Do
it's
tell.
It's called A New Discipline.
A new discipline.
Yep.
No love for beat?
Well, I just thought it would be kind of good because this does kind of mark a brand new era of the band, and since it started with Discipline, I don't know,
okay,
a new discipline.
Okay.
I don't know. We can change it in posts.
There is no editing here. We are including this bit. It is episode 3. Rob, how you doing?
I'm doing great, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. It's a
Dandy,
Seinfeld / Curb Your Enthusiasm reference, but I digress. So we are actually, although recording this episode a little bit on the early side, by the time we do put it out, it will be close to our 2-week time frame, I guess, when we put these out. You, sir, are going to see a up-and-coming band called Iron Maiden this weekend. And
yeah, I hear they're good. They're a good new band.
Yeah, I hear they're pretty good. And I am going on vacation myself, so we figured, we would get episode 3 recorded. We'll have it out sometime next week, and then, life will be good for our 85 listeners.
Yeah, it's thank you everybody for that, by the way. Everybody who's watched, we really appreciate that.
Oh, absolutely. I joke, of course. We do appreciate. I mean, we Rob and I both did not expect to have, I guess, the amount of listening just from these 2 episodes, especially since we are still very much working out the kinks. But we really do appreciate it. It would be really cool if you guys comment and give us any feedback on the show or share your favorite King Crimson albums, songs, etc. And that, Rob.
And we would also, sorry to interrupt you, but we would also appreciate if you liked and subscribed to our YouTube channel and checked out our SoundCloud. I'm going to try to get up the audio for these podcasts on the SoundCloud very soon too. And I wanted to also briefly mention real quick, because you mentioned it, I am going to see Iron Maiden, and I plan on doing a kind of review of the concert pretty soon. So I might even possibly, when I get home, just record a brief video or something, just talking about my experience there. But anyway, that's just
that would be cool. And you did not share that with me behind the scenes, so I am very much looking forward to that. Because we are guys, even though we've been doing this King Crimson discography discussion, we are going to dive into other content. We're going to do other types of videos. This discography discussion is just one of many. I think I mentioned in the last episode, I'm going to be singing King Crimson in September. I do plan on doing a little short video review on the channel as well. So please be on the lookout for all of that stuff, all of that cool content. You're gonna come to learn that we do like other types of music besides King Crimson and progressive rock. So stay tuned for that.
Along those lines, in August we intend to do a couple little things as well, little new ideas that there's really been a bunch of ideas that we've been kicking back and forth, but we got a couple little things that we're going to maybe kickstart in August, and as well as hopefully wrapping up this discography series by the end of August, I think is what we discussed, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So we are anticipating on wrapping up this King Crimson series end of August, like you just said, and we already have the next band that we're going to do, I guess, discuss for the next discography discussion series. A little bit more on that. I don't think we're going to reveal what that band is yet, but we are both very excited. It's another band that we mutually love as well, so also stay tuned for that. That's going to probably start around September-ish, but let's not get too off task here.
Yes.
Before we get started, I do have something I want to address, and this was something that I brought up to you behind the mic as well too. I just want to sort of put a re-emphasis on what this specific series is about, and that's, of course, the discography discussion series. we love King Crimson. We love this band. It's why when we started this channel, why we chose this band first, because you and I have just a mutual love for this band, as well
Oh
as
yeah.
tons of other bands and artists as well.
Mm-hmm.
With that being said, I do not have a degree in all things King Crimson. Neither do you. We do not get paid to do this. We do this for fun. Um, we sound like a bunch of amateurs. That is partially intentional, and we plan to keep it that way. There is a lot of work behind the scenes that gets put into these episodes, and we do some research. We do put notes together, um, but we don't claim to be experts.
Yep.
You know, really the core of this show, and here's the thing: like any podcast, I listen to tons of different podcasts. There's really no such thing as a podcast format. It's not like radio. It's not like TV. There's really no specific format. I guarantee if you're someone that listens to different types of podcasts, they're not the same in structure whatsoever. The closest thing to structure and the core of this series is indeed talking about catalog as well as our opinion on the songs. Yes, we do throw in some trivia. We don't claim for it to be 100% true or factual. Some of it is, of course. Some of it, I don't know if it's true or not. It's pure speculation. So I don't, you know, I don't you won't hear either of us saying this definitively happened. Um, it's just things that we hear when we do read up on articles online or magazines, whatever the case may be. So that was just something I really wanted to put out there, that at its core, this series is really talking about, our favorite band's catalog, in this case, King Crimson right now, and our opinion on each of the tracks on the albums that we are discussing. Anything you want to add on to that?
Well, and like basically, I mean, that being said, this kind of goes into a little bit what you were saying, but we do research. Particularly you do a very nice job of the research
Thank you.
And the providing notes for both of us. And I always kind of do a little brief refresher before where I'll just kind of look up some stuff on the internet about this specific album. Like I'll go to Wikipedia or other places, and sometimes we are human and we make mistakes. And I think the goal of this, like you said, with this podcast is more to give our opinion rather than be informative, although we don't mind being a little informative. And when we make mistakes, we'll own up to it, hence the Andy tears himself apart segment, as I mentioned to you. And as you said, I mean, I think you pretty much covered it, man. I mean, we're just trying to have fun and do our thing. We're not professional yet. And I should say we're not doing this so we can, we're not doing this because as a job, nor I don't think, even if we became really successful and it could be a job, would we want it to feel like a job? I just enjoy talking about music, particularly with you, because you and I both have just always jived in that way. And that's my drive mostly, is to do it for fun and just to share with people, because that's fun too.
Yeah, I would, I absolutely agree with that. And I think for me personally, if it started to feel like a job, I wouldn't want to do it anymore. I mean, yeah, it does take some time doing the research that we do and putting together the notes that I put together. That does take time, but in a really strange way, I do enjoy doing that. If it really started to feel like a chore or a job, I would not want to do it anymore. I really wouldn't. And I don't know if you feel the same, but I know for me, I wouldn't want to do it anymore.
Same here. I mean, as I've said before, I've got another channel, and there's a lot of work that goes into it too. But I love video editing, which is why, like, for this series and my channel, I enjoyed editing the last podcast very much. So it's, I mean, it was mostly audio editing and stuff, but I just like doing that. So yes, there's some work that goes into it that we don't mind doing. But when I've definitely been at a point with certain like series and stuff on my channel where I'm just like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I'm sick of doing it. So I just stopped doing it rather than stress about it, because at the end of the day, we're doing this for fun, and we're not really doing this to please anybody else except ourselves, to be honest. And it's not to be selfish, but and we want to put out good quality content, but And we do also, by the way, really appreciate and care that everybody listens to us. But if we just did it for everybody else, then it's, and just do it to do it, then I wouldn't want to do it.
Absolutely. And it is cool. And even though, like you said, we do it for ourselves, if we can introduce this band or other bands that we'll talk about in the future to people that are not familiar with the bands we're talking about, that's great. That's fantastic. That's why we really, guys, we want to see, please comment, share with us your favorite, your favorite bands, your favorite songs by King Crimson, or if you're getting into King Crimson because of this series, we want to hear that. And we're also open to criticism if there is a mistake that we make, but don't be an asshole about it. Approach it in a civil way. There's a way to correct somebody's mistake. There's a way of approaching criticism. But if you come and attack us, we're not gonna really respond to that.
Yeah, exactly. And also, keep in mind it's our opinions. So I don't know why the entire internet gets triggered over different opinions, but people have them.
Because that is the internet.
Okay to have different. It's okay to have different opinions from other people. As you guys have listened to, Andrew and I have had different opinions on this podcast between each other. I'm sure we're gonna have a lot more, and there's times where debate's gonna be heated, but at the end of the day, I respect his opinion and he respects mine. It's not that hard to do. So anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. But let's move on from this. Just something that we both wanted to put out there, but let's get started. So, what's the band we're talking about again?
I think it's Steely Dan.
Steely Dan. Hey, Steely Dan, great band, by the way. But that's not who we're talking about.
Actually really good.
We're talking about King Crimson, and boy, we have quite a turn here. So we discussed on the last episode that
we left off on
Red, and once Red was released, actually I think before Red was released, King Crimson was gone, ceased to exist, and we have what ended up only being, I shouldn't say only because it's a long time, but a 7-year hiatus with a lot of things going on in between. Old Frippo Pants, oh God, he did quite a bit. He did a lot of session work. He worked with Bowie. He produced for Peter Gabriel.
Yep.
Oh God, what else did he do? Now this would have been good in terms of research to actually add my notes.
I think, what about the Fripp and Eno stuff?
How can we forget the Fripp and Eno stuff? Oh, those first 2 records are so good. He did a lot of collaboration with Robert Fripp, Robert Fripp, Jesus Christ. A lot of collaborating with
Brian. How could you get that wrong? You said it wrong.
You fucking Brian Eno. And actually, I think his Eno work kind of laid the groundwork for a lot of the Frippertronic, which we'll talk about when we get into these records. He worked with Blondie. He formed this
Talking Heads.
That's right. He formed this dance new wave group called the League of Gentlemen just shortly before resurrecting King Crimson. Bill Bruford and John Wetton from the Red Era formed the band UK. I believe both of those guys did some solo work as well. Am I missing anything?
The first thing he did was he went on some kind of weird religious spiritual retreat.
Oh, for Frippo Pants, that's right.
Yeah, I don't really know because I know that was largely a reason why he broke up with the band. He was having some kind of weird existential crisis. So I don't know the full extent of that, but I do know he did that for, I think, a couple years, and then he ended up moving to New York City, and then that's when he really got back into the whole session work, as far as I know. And I know you mentioned Bowie, but it should really be mentioned that he does the guitar on Heroes, which is such an iconic song, and really that guitar on that song is very...
Oh, his guitar playing so on iconic. Both Heroes and Scary Monster Super Creep is some of his best guitar work. And you hear some of that on these records that we're going to talk about in a little bit.
It's kind of funny you mentioned Scary Monsters. So I used to have David Bowie was one of the very first artists that I really got into that got me into music. And I had a 2 discs best of collection of of his stuff. And on the second disc was the track Scary Monsters and Super Creeps. And I always remember thinking, hearing that song, like, I don't know who plays the guitar on this, but this guitar is amazing in this song, you know? And then I later found out it was Robert Fripp, and I'm like, well, I guess it was a love affair from the start.
His guitar playing on that track is wicked. And you mentioned Heroes too.
Yeah.
Like I said, but he plays on several tracks on both those records, and it's like I said, I think it's some of his best playing, especially when you compare that to his playing on King Crimson records. So he did a lot of session work in between that 7-year time period. He produced Peter Gabriel's, I want to say, second and third albums.
It was. I think he actually plays on the first one too. It's like the first couple, if I'm not mistaken.
That
but I
something like that.
There.
That sounds right. But also he did put out which I haven't listened to. He did put out a solo album as well too in 1979, I believe, which Peter Gabriel features on a track. Daryl Hall, of all people, features on several tracks, I believe, and a few other people as well too. I'm not thinking, might even be on a couple tracks. I could be wrong about that. He did a lot in between that time period, and I want to say it was late 1980 when he started to put together what eventually became King Crimson, but originally was not King Crimson. He was putting together this band called Discipline, which of course ended up being the name of the first record of this new incarnation of King Crimson.
I was reading about this last night,
go ahead.
A little bit, and he did start the band King Crimson, the band Discipline, and I believe they actually did a show or a handful of shows, and then they ended up deciding to change the name to King Crimson eventually, but he specifically got the players he wanted and kind of saw a specific sound to specifically sound way different than King Crimson. He wanted he really wanted to dive into this new sound, very influenced by a lot of like the people he played with, a lot of that art rock new wave from that period. Which
you definitely hear. You definitely hear that influence of again Peter Gabriel. Talking Head goes without saying. A lot of like the stuff he was doing in the late 70s and 80s, you very much hear on these records that we're going to talk about today. I mentioned the Uncut magazine in the last episode that we recorded, and I was reading up again last night, the albums we're going to talk about, and I guess he was, I don't remember if he was like on his way home. I don't remember, but he was in the car listening back to the sessions that the band recorded that day, and I guess he said like I felt King Crimson all of a sudden. Like this felt like King Crimson, not in the sense of the King Crimson sound from prior, but just this approach to music is very King Crimson. King Crimson at its core, whether we're talking about their debut album or their last album, King Crimson at its core was always about trying new things with music, specifically with instruments, where you can go with the instrumentation, technology of the time. That's King Crimson really at its core, and I guess that's when he made the decision to go ahead and turn this into King Crimson as opposed to a new band altogether.
And he's called King Crimson in the past a way of doing things, and you could tell by listening to these three albums that it's the same. It's King Crimson. It's the same, not the same band in terms of players, although there's a couple of them, but in the sound and the approach, in the, as you said, instrumentation and the experimental aspect of it as well. So I could definitely see where he's coming from there, especially just given in retrospect what he said about King Crimson as a whole and the whole purpose of the band.
Absolutely. So do we want to go ahead and start talking about Discipline?
Discipline, sure. Go
All right. So Discipline, album number 8. released on September 22nd, 1981 on EG Records in the United Kingdom, but was also released on Warner Brothers Records in the US. It had reached number 41 on the UK album charts and received mixed to positive reviews. As we mentioned before, this was the first album following a 7-year hiatus. Only founder Robert Fripp and then Bill Bruford, later edition Bill Bruford from the Rad era, returned from the prior band, and we are introduced with not only 2 new members, but pretty consistent members.
Yes, if I may.
If I may.
If I may, the band members for this are Adrian Belew on electric guitar, guitar synthesizer, lead vocals, and vocal loops. Robert Fripp, of course, or as Andy likes to call him, Mr. Frippo Pants. Electric guitar, guitar synthesizer, and his goddamn devices, also known, and of course, the Frippertronics. Tony Levin on Chapman stick, backing vocals and bass, and Bill Bruford drums and slit drum. And then I believe you pronounce it Rate Davies produced the album.
Yeah, which a couple of things to point out here. One, this is the first time that they've brought in I believe at least, they brought in an outside producer. It could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure the first 7 records were self-produced by the band. So this is a first. Another thing to point out, Tony Levin, although he is, of course, the bass player and plays the Chapman stick, which we'll talk about in a little bit, this is the first time we have a backing vocalist as well, too. He did a lot of the backup vocals.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third thing to point out with Adrian Belew, this is the first time we have a second guitar player.
Yep, that was huge. I was reading when I was saying before about how Fripp purposely wanted to go in this new sound, this new direction. Adrian Belew was actually quite integral to that in the sense that there would be a second guitar player. And just the way, if anybody's familiar with Adrian Belew's style, he's got a very, very unique way of playing guitar. And before King Crimson, he was already starting to become very well known. He got to start with Frank Zappa. He played on he was only on one studio album, but he played on a very successful album of Zappa's called Chic Your Booty. He played on some Bowie albums. He played in Talking Heads for quite a while. He was on one of their live albums. I believe he was also on Remain in Light, which is probably their biggest album. And he was actually, fun fact, briefly considered to replace David Byrne by the other members of Talking Heads. I don't know if you knew that. He ended up declining it, I guess. And he played, I'm pretty sure he did some other session work. Yeah, he actually ended up playing on the Paul Simon album, Graceland, after these 3 King Crimson albums, and has worked with a bunch of other people.
Yeah, which that I didn't know till the other day. Playing on Paul Simon's record, that is. Great album, by the way. And the Talking Heads influence is definitely, you hear it on all 3 of these records, and I have become, the Talking Heads become one of my favorite bands. So when it was time to go back and listen to these, well, I should say, really, Discipline's the only one I knew, whereas the other 2, I don't think I ever listened to, or maybe listened to once. So knowing that there was going to be this heavy influence of Talking Heads and world music and everything else, I was really excited going into these albums. And I know for some that could be worrisome when they hear, oh, this is really heavily influenced by not only another band, but at the time a very popular band. But don't let that discourage you either. I mean, this is still its own thing. Wouldn't you agree? Yeah, yes. Without a doubt.
It's its own thing, and it's undeniably King Crimson.
Absolutely.
At the same time.
Could I picture David Byrne singing some of these songs? Yeah, sure. But don't be fooled that this is still King Crimson.
Can I dub this period of King Crimson? Can I? I had an interesting term for it. I want to call this era of King Crimson Talking Heads for Big Boys, because they kind of take a lot of what the Talking Heads were doing at that time, although there's a lot of differences, sure, and it's way more, but they've like kind of upped the musicality side of it. You know, they turn it up to 11. So
Talking Heads for big boys. There you go. And I think that is the perfect segue to start diving into this record track by track. You ready? Talking Heads for big boys. I like that.
I was thinking of it yesterday, so you're welcome.
So here we go. Side 1, track 1, Elephant Talk. So right off the bat, first track, and I think this is a great song to open the record. If this doesn't tell you new band, new sound, then I don't know what does, especially coming off of 7 years prior of Red. Like, this is, even though we just said this is King Crimson at its core, this couldn't be any different from the last era of the band.
Oh yeah, yep. I mean, the last era of the band. I mean, if you were somebody who didn't know any of the history of King Crimson and you were to go from Red to this album, it's a very stark contrast. It's almost unrecognizable until you get further into the album.
Yeah, absolutely. And I got to tell you, and you know, I don't know if this has been done by other artists prior or since, but I really love the lyrical approach to this track, and that's really essentially he's using, and when I say he, Adrian Belew, that is alliteration. Pretty much each line has a word from the alphabet until they do get eventually to E, which of course E standing for elephant. I've never heard that done in a song before, and I don't think that's something I really didn't pick up on until the other day when I started really diving into these 3 records.
Yeah, it's a weird approach to lyrics. This whole album lyrically is very, very strange. And we should mention that Adrian Belew wrote all the lyrics for both this album and the other, pretty much every King Crimson album featuring him.
That's right. We didn't mention that. This is the first time where we have an actual member in the band. I mean, you can argue that Peter Sinfield wasn't a member of the band, same with Richard Palmer James, but this is the first time where we have a band member, someone who's playing another instrument, in this case the vocalist too, who is writing the lyrics.
And I agree, it's a very weird approach because he starts with the A's and he says a bunch of synonyms for talking, basically, or different ways of talking, and then he says a bunch of A words and then B's and then C's and until he gets to Elephant Talk, and it's kind of silly, but it's also you're right, it just works. I like it. And what I was mentioning about Adrian Belew's unique guitar playing, one of his kind of trademark things is that he makes noises with his guitar that sound like real life noises. So in this one, it sounds like an elephant blowing its trunk. Like the guitar's like wow, wow, you know, like however you want to do that voice, and it's pretty
which
cool.
Is really something that he becomes well established for, with just what he can do with his guitar, and then to just have that almost like contradicting against Fripp's guitar. It's that in of itself is just so innovative. Obviously, they weren't the first band to have 2 guitar players, but just the way their guitars go exactly
contrast each other.
This was something new. It really was. And with this song too, I can't pinpoint what it's about specifically. But just the use of alliteration, again, is a really cool thing. I have the lyrics pulled up right now. Talk, it's only talk. Arguments, agreements, advice, answers, articulate, announcements, it's only talk. And then he goes on to, with the next verse again, to do it with,
babble, verbal, and then he just goes.
So I don't think it's about anything concrete or specific, but it's a cool way to approach lyrics to a song. And I think this is just a really cool opener.
The lyrics are very surrealistic. like kind of like a minimalist surrealism. I don't know if that's quite the way to put it, but it's some of the lyrics are simple, but they are not. It's like there's a couple songs where there's sort of a meaning behind it, but at the same time, some of it like this is just a bit. It's kind of like an abstract painting, but
yeah,
with lyrics.
absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? It's a very very odd way to
Yeah,
write a
no,
song.
and I think you put that really well. I think really at its core, Adrian Belew's lyrics on these three records are very minimalistic. And there are some other tracks where, you know, you definitely have more of a concrete understanding of what the lyrics are about, but they're still very minimal. You just made me think of a quote from the Uncut magazine. And even though we're talking about lyrics, but the author summarized this era of the band, but I think it was Discipline specifically, as something along the lines of, I'm paraphrasing, Talking Heads and Steve Vai having a baby. And that's the Discipline era of King Crimson. And Steve Vai, if you're not familiar with who he is, he's a minimalist composer who was around, who's pretty big around this time as well, too, the early 80s.
Yeah, they were also influenced by sort of see, now this is where I should have done the research a little better, but there was also some.
It's very unprofessional of you.
I messed up. There's there's also like a kind of world music influence as well. You can hear, and certain tracks here, and we'll get into it a little later, but have this kind of world music approach and sound as well, I would say. But we'll get into that later. You know.
Absolutely. So let's move on to track 2, Frame by Frame. Mm-hmm. This is one of my favorite songs on the record.
Same, yes.
This one, when you listen to it, almost sounds like how we can sort of get lost in our own thoughts. I meant to pull up the lyrics. I have been making it a point to pull up lyrics.
I could probably say the lyrics. I know this album so well. You know, it's like frame by frame, death by drowning in your analysis. You know, I think you're very very. I think you're very right there. It's very introspective lyrics. You know, just it's the whole song's got this weird. I don't know how. And this whole album really has this weird vibe, and that I can't put to words. It's but yeah, very introspective lyrics. I agree. Very very much about kind of getting lost in your own thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. Which I know, you know, like me personally, I can very much relate to.
Same. Yeah.
This is a cool track. I mean, I love the instruments are cool too. It almost reminds me of like Hail to the Thief era Radiohead. I know you don't know Radiohead very well. Another favorite band of mine, but I definitely can't help but wonder if this era of King Crimson was an influence for them for albums like, again, Hail to the Thief, or maybe even In Rainbows. I don't know, pure speculation on my part. But that's just what I heard when I was going back and listening to this over the past couple of days. Mm-hmm. This also coming off of Elephant Talk, which is a you know, really approach more spoken word as opposed to singing. This is the first song where we get a taste of Adrian Belew as a vocalist. You know, if you're not familiar with what he did prior to King Crimson, this is really your first take is this track. And, you know, I don't want to get too sidetracked on today's episode, but I just have to point out that he is in terms of a guitar player and a vocalist, as a vocalist, a one of a kind.
Yes.
And I'm going to get into that more when we talk about track 4, but no one sounds like him. I mean, both like when he does actually sing and when he does the spoken word stuff. I mean, like he is really just a one of a kind.
Can I make a controversial statement?
Mm-hmm.
Best King Crimson vocalist, in my opinion. Adrian Belew is the best King Crimson vocalist, and he might not objectively be the best, but he's my favorite. And I think
I'm going to get back to you in terms, I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm going to get back to you in terms of favorite once we get through the last 3 records.
Yeah.
But just from a pure technical standpoint, absolutely, he's the best King Crimson vocalist. Absolutely.
What I want to, I won't get. This all I'll say about it. We'll get into it, later. But the reason I feel that way too is also he, just out of kind of fairness, I think he gets it because, to be honest, he had more of a chance to really show how diverse his vocals can be, because he literally plays on the next 6 King Crimson records, and no vocalist in King Crimson history had that longevity that he had. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, and this is a band that had radical lineup changes for practically every fucking record. And really, when you break it down, I mean, from this point on, he sings on about almost half of the Crimson catalog.
Yeah, and this is like what, their 8th studio album? I mean, he, as far as I'm concerned, he is, aside from obviously Robert Fripp and perhaps Bill Bruford, maybe one of the most important members of the band, just because of how
absolutely.
long
but I'm going to go ahead and throw Tony Levin in that equation too.
He had on the sound from this point going forward,
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I don't know. This era of the band is just fucking great, and I think, in terms of looking at it from a King Crimson standpoint, band standpoint, that is, I think this is an underrated era. I think there are a lot of fans that are so gung-ho that King Crimson is in the Court of the Crimson King 2 Red, that this era of the band is very overlooked. But there's some irony to that, because more so of the time than now, this was definitely the most popular, the most commercial the band ever was. So I don't know. I don't want to get too sidetracked here, but so far we're off to a kick-ass start with this record, with Elephant Talk introducing, that this is a new band, new sound that we're doing, and then Frame by Frame, it's a great track.
Can I say one more thing about Frame by Frame before we move on to the next one? I love, and I saw an interview with Bill Bruford about this, and he was saying one of the things that attracted him to doing this kind of record, because if you know Bill Bruford, he's very much about the music side of it first. He likes technical playing, he likes proficiency and all that stuff. And he was saying one of the things that really appealed to him about this new sound is that, and it's very much highlighted in this track Frame by Frame. If you look at what Robert Fripp is doing on the guitar, he is holding down the rhythm, but he's not playing chords. It's all notes. It's all notes, and the notes just keep going, progressing. Like he goes higher and higher, higher and higher up the neck, and it just builds and builds and builds and builds and builds and builds and builds, and at the same time, Adrian Belew, the stuff he's playing like sort of a weirdly timed riff himself. So they're both almost holding down 2 separate rhythms at the same time, and I think that really kind of is at the core in a lot of ways, alongside the amazing rhythm work that Tony Levin and Bill Bruford are doing on top, or like below it. I think that really highlights, especially in this track, and really this being sort of the first track, in my opinion, that highlights this well, kind of what they were going for with this record.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
Yeah, I just think it works
another
really,
track
really
in
well.
particular that we'll talk about in a second that I think really summarizes your point that you just made.
Yeah. But anyway, have at it. Sorry.
Any Kahoo, track 3. Let's have fun pronouncing this one. Mate
Kudasai.
Thank you. Mate Kudasai.
Which means please wait.
Please wait for me in Japanese.
I think so.
I think so too.
I'm sorry if we got that wrong. We're not, 100%.
I know, but comment section. Here we go. No, I'm kidding.
Explodes.
A little background on this track. I guess apparently this evolved from another song recorded by the League of Gentlemen, which was a band that we had talked about that Fripp had formed really like a year or two before Discipline. called, here I go again with pronouncing this, Northa Kadadusai, I don't fucking know, which also in turn became a track called North Star from Robert Fripp's solo album that we also mentioned, Exposure. I really need to check that out, by the way.
It's very good. I actually when I saw King Crimson, very quick side note, they played a track from that album.
Oh, really? Okay.
It's very good. Yeah, you should check it out. It's good.
Yeah, no,
But
I
anyway.
definitely will. This is a really pretty track. I like this one a lot. I listened to this and it sounds like it could sort of be a story of longing, which in some ways seems to be not necessarily a theme on this record, but it does kind of go hand in hand with Frame by Frame with how we get lost in our own thoughts. Like it almost feels like the lyrics on this record go through different emotions. I don't know. I could just be like on the track Frame by Frame over analyzing.
Hey, it's open to interpretation. That's what I love about music, especially a band like King Crimson.
Especially, that's the best music in my opinion.
Yeah.
But I really like this track. This is a pretty one. What do you think?
This is one of my favorite tracks on the album. Fun fact: this is my wife's favorite track.
Oh, really?
She is not a huge King Crimson fan. I'm just gonna tell a little story here. She's not an enormous King Crimson fan, but she did hear a couple of their albums. I recommended to her Court of the Crimson King a long time ago, and she likes that record a lot. But fun fact: we were on our honeymoon in the Southwest, and we were driving through. We were driving to. Was it driving to Vegas? No, we were driving from the Grand Canyon to, I think it was Bryce Canyon, something like that. And it was the sun was setting. It was ended up becoming full dark by the time we finished this album. And we're driving through the desert, and she just really loved this album a lot. And this to her, I think, the last I had talked to her about this was her favorite track of all of them. And I think honestly for me, it's one of my favorites too. And as I was saying to you with Adrian Belew's vocals, I think this is a contender for top like 3, if not maybe top 5 best vocal performances on a King Crimson track.
Oh yeah, definitely.
His
in terms
vocals
of vocal performance, beautiful. And this one, a little strange actually, but I like the alternate version a little better, which technically is the original version.
Yes, I actually own the vinyl record for this, and I remember because I heard the first version of this album that I really was listening to was, I guess it would have been the 30th anniversary edition, and they all have different intros. There's actually 3 different ones now, and the one that I'm used to is the one with the sort of seagull sounding intro. That it's again Belew doing that weird guitar technique of his, making the guitars almost sound like a seagull. That's my favorite version, but on the vinyl record version, there's one that starts with it's a weird guitar sound that Fripp does.
Which that's the version I like a little better. But I mean, both versions are great, and there was, I guess, something to do with the record company when they started putting the King Crimson catalog on CD, and I don't know. There is a backstory to why they did that I don't know the level of truth of, but like you said, the vinyl version does have what really is the original version with Fripp's little guitar interlude in the beginning, and then the CD version. I do believe the 40th anniversary does include both, but what's on the actual album track listing, the CD version does have the version with the seagull sound from Adrian Belew's guitar.
They're both great versions.
Both great. I mean, they really are.
I think the intros on both songs are really great, but what really makes the song for me is the vocal. It's just such a nice. I don't know. It's very like ethereal kind of sound. I really like it. It's really lovely vocal.
Yeah, definitely. It's a beautiful song. Either version is great. Listen to both. I agree with you. One of the best vocal performances on any King Crimson song. But let's move on to track 4. I am watching time, and I want to make sure that we do abide on our mutually agreed cutoff time.
That's okay.
But
Yeah.
track 4, my favorite track on the record,
Indiscipline.
Indiscipline.
That's very interesting. So go ahead. Why is this your favorite track?
So it wasn't at first. It wasn't at first. I
Mhm.
was, when listening to these 3 records, was really having some difficulty with some of the songs with more of the spoken word approach.
Mhm.
I will say for these 3 records, I started growing more of an appreciation, and I don't know if it was just because really I was listening. This is all I listened to over the past 2 days, but I was starting to
Mhm.
grow more of an appreciation with certain songs, listening to them on an individual basis, and then going back to listening to it in the context of the album.
Mhm.
And that paid off with quite a few songs, this one being one of them. I don't know. I love the build up to this song. This song, in terms of the lyrics, is about a letter that Adrian Belew's wife wrote to him about a sculpture that she made, and it's basically
Mhm.
him talking through it. Like I'm gonna look at it, and like we're listening to him formulating his opinion on it, and it
Yeah.
reaches to this like climactic scream. I still like it. I liked it. And it just, I don't know. And with the instrumentation in the back, kind of reminding me of Red Era KC, it just, I don't know. One thing I love about this band, and I think of songs like Starless, I love build-ups. This band has a way of
Yes, me
just
too.
building
Yeah.
up, building up, building up, and then boom. And that's showcased on this
And
song.
the the Bruford Levin rhythm in this is some of the stuff Bill Bruford's doing is incredible. Um, as well as Tony Levin. They're probably the best rhythm section that King Crimson has ever had.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Um,
Um,
but they're very that the rhythm is definitely a very highlight point in this track. And the whole "I like it" thing is like the most quotable thing ever. Rachel and I are constantly we still do it about just like I like it. I'll just and I just reference. It's so good.
what do you think about this song?
I love this track. It's a really good. I wouldn't say it's my favorite, but I love the stuff that's going on rhythmically with the track. I like the weird, almost. There's sort of a dark vibe for some reason. That I always got from the weird spoken word part. Adrian Belew almost sounds like he's going insane a little bit for some reason. He's like not looking at it for a full day and then looking at it to see if I liked it. I did,
Well, and this is
he
where,
just sounds like he's going nuts
and
or
this is
something.
Talking Heads influence I don't think people talk about enough. And
Yes,
there's another track
yes,
in this vein too on Beat, that also I get this vibe where, like you said, like it's got this
uh-huh.
like paranoia sound, and that's like
Yes,
a staple in terms of the Talking Heads music. I mean, David Byrne, like he just, the way he approaches his lyrics, like he just has like a paranoid dude, and that's the vibe I get in this song. And
and
then add
Adrian,
the
it's almost like
instrumentation,
Adrian.
it just I don't know,
Yeah,
it
and it's
sounds
like
so cool.
it's kind of like Adrian Belew adopted some of that, but uh, he he uh, he blends the quirkiness of like the David Byrne quirkiness with like a bit of a darkness behind it, which I really appreciate. And I think that's partially due to King Crimson's sound as well. But there's like a maniacal kind of weird um, sense that I get that I wouldn't get from Talking Heads. Again, as we said, Talking Heads for big
Talking
boys.
Heads for big boys. I was reading too, and I did pick up on it on Absent Lovers. That's the live album that we'll talk
Mm-hmm.
about a little more. I'm going to reference a little more in the next 2 records. Um, but apparently it was very common. I don't think on the Discipline tour, but on the Three of the Perfect Pair tour, uh, apparently it was very common for Adrian Belew to add additional improvised lyrics as well
Yes.
too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's funny. I was reading. I forget where I read it. It was an online article a few weeks ago. Actually, it might have been like around the time we recorded the first episode about this song. And Dacko, who's the current singer of King Crimson, um, he, I guess, going back to my point, how do you sound like Adrian Belew? He rearranged the song and he sings the song as opposed to, doing the spoken word thing like Adrian Belew does.
They did.
And I guess
They did
supposedly
the song.
Robert Fripp even encouraged him to rewrite the song, which I'm glad he ended up not doing. And I'm not going to get into that rant,
Mm-hmm.
but I was listening to a live version with the current lineup yesterday, and it just further proves my point again that this is a song for this era of the band. I didn't
Yes.
like the melodic approach that they took for this track. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, and I know there was a bit. We can get into that later too, but there was also like a bit of a falling out there for a bit recently when King Crimson got back together as like the 7 and now 8-piece band. Um, and there was some drama between Adrian Belew and Robert Fripp, and I could understand why for certain fans and for I believe Adrian Belew too, why there'd be a little sour grapes there, because I'm pretty sure Adrian Belew was pretty much told that the new King Crimson lineup wasn't really like, basically Fripp couldn't see him in that lineup, and the fact they end up doing some of Adrian Belew's songs, I'm sure, it just doesn't. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't jive with me too well, because this is, like you said, this is clearly a track where it lends itself way more to the spoken word formula that Adrian Belew is known for with a lot of this stuff, and I don't know, it's kind of a weird decision
It is, and I get
that
where the band's
Fripp made
coming
there, I
from
think,
because this is a
Yeah.
fan favorite. So it's
Yeah,
like
exactly.
you wanna include this song on the set list. I get that. Um, I just don't like I don't know. I don't like the approach, and it's a little bothersome that even Fripp was encouraging Jacko to rearrange the
Yes.
song. I mean, again, I don't want to get into that, but um, yeah, it's like I said, this is my favorite on the record, and I think it's honestly it's one of King Crimson's best songs.
Yes, I
But
agree.
let's move on
I totally
to
agree.
side
Yep.
2, track 5, Fella Hun
Fella
Jinjeet,
Hunginji.
an anagram of Heat in the Jungle, which apparently was going to be the name of this track originally. And Frippo Pants was like, no, let's come up with like a more, ambitious title. And here we have it, Fella Hun Jinjeet. Fella Hun Jinjeet. There you go.
Mm-hmm. Fella Hunginji. Fella Hunginji. All right. Anyway, I love that. This is my personal favorite track on the album.
Oh, fuck you.
I.
I kid. Go on.
Moving on. This is my personal favorite track of the album. Some cool, probably some of the coolest bass, or I can't tell if it's bass or Chapman stick he's playing on this one, by Tony Levin. And the drum again, the rhythm section in this song is unbelievable. The interplay between Tony Levin and Bill Bruford I absolutely love. And I don't know what it is about this track. I like the vocal, and I also love the whole spoken word part in the middle of the song, which is, I think a lot of fans know this, but basically an actual account of Adrian Belew's of running into some street thugs, and being kind of not threatened by them, but aggressively pursued by them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's you could tell in the song he's actually like, when you know that this actually happened to him, the story, you could tell that he's pretty frazzled.
Well, we
And
hear in
he
the
didn't realize that.
song, the spoken
Yeah,
word part is him actually telling the
yeah,
story to the rest of the band members, and Fripp was like hit record, and they incorporated that into the song. If you had asked
yep.
me a few years ago, actually, hell, if you even asked me last week, I would have told you that this was my favorite track on the record as
Uh-huh.
well, and it's still one of my favorites. Everything that you said about it definitely summarizes my opinion on it. I love
Mm-hmm.
both the verse and the chorus. Everyone is just tight. The playing is tight. The vocals are great.
Yep.
The chorus, it's a kick-ass song. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't really have anything else to add to it. You kind of summarized my thought about it, as well as, there is some legend with this song, with, again, with Adrian being nearly not killed, but, his experience with those street thugs. And that was sort of
Yeah,
really
he
what laid
basically
down the foundation of the song.
I mean, we don't need to say in detail what it is because he kind of says it in the song. So if you know the song, listen to it. But long story short, they're recording this album. He's on the street with a tape recorder. He gets stopped by some thugs asking like, what he's recording, blah blah blah, and then he talks about it in the song. And there's a cool little twist at the end. But yeah, this actually happened. And wasn't he like recounting the story to the rest of the band, and then Fripp, I think, actually recorded him without him even knowing it. And then that's what they put in the song, which is pretty cool.
And even with this one, some live versions,
was...
again, he'll, just like within Discipline, I guess it was known that he would add improvised lyrics as well, and even, I guess, elaborate on the story more. I'm not really too sure, but this is another great track.
Yeah. It's always been, I think, always shall be my favorite track on the album. There's just something about it. And I think the fact, like I said, that it's got that cool story behind it really makes me like it even more.
Yeah, definitely. All right, let's move on to track 6, The Sheltering Sky. Although it's a grower, it is still my least favorite.
It's still what? Sorry, you cut out for a second.
This track has been a grower. Fucking mic picks up everything. It is still my least favorite.
This is actually one of my favorites, and so this is this is I'll tell you why this is one of my favorites. So I didn't really think too much of this track either, but then I watched a video of them playing it live, and I have a totally newfound respect for it. I highly recommend watching this one live. Sure. Incredible. This is one of my favorite tracks on the entire album. I actually really love. First of all, the sound is very dark. This is probably the darkest song on the album, and Bill Bruford is playing. I wish I knew the instrument. It's let's see. Does he have it? Is it on here? Is it the? I want to say it's the slit drum, possibly. It basically is this like weird sort of electronic kind of drum that he actually holds in his arms, and he's got what do you call the drumstick where it's got the big like puffy ball on the top of it? You know what I'm talking about?
I know what you're talking about.
You know what I'm talking about. No idea. He's playing it with that, and he's on the stage, and he's like kind of like rocking back and forth, playing the rhythm on it, and it has like that weird kind of light sound to it. And then Tony Levin is playing some really dark, really like low sound on the Chapman stick, and some of the stuff that Robert Fripp is doing on the guitar in this is
I mean, good. There's definitely and like I said, this one really did. It has grown on me.
It is a grower, sure. Yes,
and
right.
There's a lot of cool aspects to the song. I just love the overall ambiance to this piece. I guess my gripe with it, and still is to an extent, that it's just that typical King Crimson boring noodling that drives me crazy with songs, and we've referenced them before, Moonchild, even Providence to a degree, even though that's a track I really do like. But it is growing on me, and I'm definitely going to check out that live performance that you're referring to.
When we're done here, I'll send you a link and check it out, and I think I honestly think my opinion changed after watching them play it live. Watching them actually play the song, I was like, this is
I think fantastic. The other thing too is, and I mentioned this in one of the other episodes, I can't help but wonder if maybe it was just better sequenced, then maybe I would have, I think, yes. And not that this is the first King Crimson record to do this, closing with 2 instrumentals, but I think just where it's placed on the album, although the song Discipline, yes. The next track, is one of my favorites, but I think just having 2 instrumentals back to back might be part of my reasoning why this one just doesn't, even though it comes before Discipline, but I can't help but wonder if it was just a little shorter and sequenced somewhere else on the album, I would have more of an appreciation for it.
Yeah. We agree on there, but it's interesting that because see, I think Discipline is the weaker of the two. Not that it's a bad song, because I really like it. But it's weird that we're pretty much on the same page except for these last two. But I agree. I kind of don't understand the whole ending the album on two instrumentals. I think that one of the instrumentals should have been placed somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I mean somewhere, and I get. I almost wonder if like maybe it was just better closing side one, but at the same time, I feel like they purposely included Indiscipline as the closer for side one, and then Discipline as the closer for side two is like a contradiction type of thing. This is just pure speculation on my part, but I just think had it been sequenced somewhere else, I would like it maybe just a little more.
Yeah, I could agree with that. I think it doesn't have the strongest closing in terms of the sequencing, but I still really like all of the tracks on the album. In my opinion, it doesn't take away from the album too much to the point where I think it's like, oh, that ruins it, and doesn't. It's still overall as a whole, I think it's
absolutely, and I do think the song Discipline is a great closer, and I like I said, I prefer this one over the Sheltering Sky. It's got this pre-techno thing going on and I'm not a big techno person, but I really like it in this song, and I don't know if that's what they were going for, but that's what it sounds like to me. This one also kind of gives me Red Era vibes in the sense of the just insane amount of time signature changes in just the span of like 5 minutes. I was reading on Wikipedia and just the different, I should pull it up actually, but just the amount of time signature changes is madness.
Oh yeah. Would you agree with me that this is the most King Crimson-y sounding song
this
on the album?
In Discipline, I think, yes.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, Jesus Christ. 5/8 to 4/4 to 5/8 to 9/8. I'm not going to read them all, but it just the level of absurdity and this would be an issue I would have if it were longer. I think that it's in terms of the time frame perfect. If you're gonna do crazy prog noodling, whatever you want to call it, at least make it verse and don't go on for fucking 15-20 minutes like this. The length of this track is perfect. It does not overstay its welcome, which is the issue I have with Sheltering Sky.
Well, see, and yeah, I could see this. See, I really enjoy the Sheltering Sky, but I think by the time you get to Discipline, it's like maybe this should have, maybe the Sheltering Sky should have been put somewhere else, But I really think for me, of the two, I still prefer the Sheltering Sky, but I still really like Discipline. I mean, it's a very small difference in my opinion. They're both very good, but I think you're right that we could agree that it could be sequenced better.
Yeah, and sequencing is going to be something I'm going to get into the next two records a little more. I do overall think this album is sequenced very well. Again, I think Sheltering Sky could either go somewhere else or just not be included on the record at all, but we're not going to continue going into that. Let's quickly cover bonus tracks / B-sides, which there's really not a lot for this one, and we've kind of mentioned them already. Again, we have the alternative version of Matakuda Dusai. Mate Kudasai. I don't know what that was, so let's just pretend. Again, I mentioned I prefer that version, but they're both great. Listen to them both. And then the other one, which was included on the 40th anniversary edition of Discipline, as well as it was one of the 50th anniversary singles, is the Terrifying Tale of Thela Hunjinji, which basically what that is it's broken into 3 parts, all edited into one track. The first part is, I guess, Robert Fripp actually promoting the song to a Warner Brothers executive. So it's interesting that they included that, but it's cool if you haven't listened to it. Then it goes into Adrian Belew telling the story, which I think is the same bit that we hear on the actual studio version, and then it goes into a live version from 1982 of Thella Hunjinji. So it's a cool what if type of thing, kind of like with the Starless Red edit, just a different way of listening to this song, but I prefer the studio version.
Yeah, so do I. I would totally agree with that.
So let's final thoughts. Final thoughts on this one.
For me, this is one of my favorite King Crimson records.
Mm-hmm.
This, to me, is also one of the most important King Crimson records. So I don't know. For me, I would say like this would be aside from maybe. So we talked about how Core of the Crimson King is really the place to start, right? I would say Core of the Crimson King, Red, and this album are the three albums that are the three that you should start with. And I think it's because each of those three albums gives you a taste of the different eras of this band. And to me, this one, those three, and I'm not just saying it because those three albums happen to be three of my favorite albums, but this one is a contender for me for like maybe not the top spot, but right there. I just think the album is. I love the completely different direction they went with this album. This is one of my favorite lineups of the band. The musicianship is second to none, and I like that for the first time. Really, we get a taste of like what King Crimson would sound like in a more not commercial but a more accessible form. I don't know. And there's no album, in my opinion, even within King Crimson's catalog and otherwise, that sounds like this. It's got a totally unique sound.
Most bands, I was thinking about this morning, most bands don't even have one album that is like a musical game changer almost. And that's not, saying that you're not a good band if you don't have, that record that radically changed music, because that's not what I'm implying.
Yeah.
But I do. There are like the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper's, and Jimi Hendrix. I think we also mentioned the last episode. Like there are just certain albums, whether you like them or not, changed music.
Yes.
And this band not only has one album that did that, but I think two. We mentioned In the Court of the Crimson King as being one of them, and that was like the album that really like started progressive rock. I mean, yeah, there were albums that influenced prior. I'm not getting into that, but that was like the first definitive progressive rock album.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward 12 years later, it's almost like they did it again. I mean, this one really introduced a new sound like Court. Definitely there was an influence of what was going on in the music culture of the time, but it's still very much its own thing. This record almost said, you know what? We can still, have that level of musicianship, but write really good pop songs as well, too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
For the most part, I would duplicate everything you just said. It's one of my favorite King Crimson records as well. I think this is also a good starting point along within the Court of the Crimson King. I would also say, depending on the person that you would be recommending this to, I think some people would really like this album over Court. I think this would be a good one for anyone that's really into like alternative rock music, and as somebody that really, that's primarily what I listen to these days. I mean, bands like Radiohead, REM, like those are my favorite bands. So when going back to this era of King Crimson, I was really excited. And I think there's really an audience just for this record alone.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, and I think I mean, my wife's a perfect example. She's really not into King Crimson very much at all, but this is one of her favorite records, and I can totally see why, because uh, it's it's just so much. It's so different, it's so different, so unique, and
But
also at
there's a
the same
level of
time, yeah,
accessibility
there is an
there too
accessibility.
that
Yeah,
hasn't been present on
yeah.
any prior King Crimson album.
I think just about any fan of King Crimson likes this album. The only the only fan that I could see might not like it too much would be the ones who are really heavy into the very, very like um, avant-garde sort of noodly side of King Crimson might not be as big of a fan of this album, and I probably wouldn't recommend this one to anybody who likes, say, the Starless, Lark's Red kind of era, just because of the heaviness. Like if you're more into the heavy side of King Crimson, this might not be quite for you either. But even so, man, it's hard not to like this one. I don't know. It's this to me this was one of those albums to me where it stood out to me immediately when I first heard it. I was surprised how much I loved this album when I first heard it, and
Yeah, I know. Looking back, this was definitely one that I really got into right away too, and it still remains a favorite.
and it's one that I go back to probably more than almost any other album of theirs. So yeah, I think it says a lot about the record.
Yeah, for sure. Let's move on. Let's move on to album record
Okay,
number
do we want to,
2.
before we do real quick, do you want to give your top 3 tracks?
Oh, for fuck's sakes. I guess if I have to, I can do that.
We'll make it quick and then we'll move on. So I bought us a little more time, by the way, so we're okay. But so go ahead.
Top 3. So for me, it would be Indiscipline,
Mm-hmm.
Frame by Frame, Belew and Gingy.
Wow, ours are going to be a little different here. Mine are Belew Genji, Mate Kudasai, and The Sheltering Sky.
Wow, that
Yep.
is I think, the most radical difference that we've had with the top 3
Yep.
today.
I would probably it's really hard not to include Frame by Frame though, because I really love that track, but it's right there. I mean, it's right there, but not quite. So
Nice. All right, so let's now move on to, for this episode, record number 2, but overall record number 9. And that is 1982's Beat. This is the first King Crimson studio album to feature a band lineup identical to that of their prior album. Starless and Bible Black had the same members that returned from Lark's Tongue, but they did lose, I think it was David Cross. So this is the first record where, identical from the last one, we have the same players,
yep.
including the producer as well.
Yep.
It was released in 1982, again by EG Records, and it hit number 39 on the UK album charts. I couldn't find any information about US charts for this one. What's interesting about this record is it makes several references to the writings of the Beat Generation, specifically the novel On the Road by Jack Kerouac. This is where the drama of this incarnation of the band starts, with the recording sessions of this one. There's a track specifically that we'll get into later that highlights the drama in a nutshell. But I was reading an interview in Uncut where Adrian Belew stated that this was the most awful record making experience that he ever went through ever. And I guess specifically tensions were tight with him and Fripp even refused to promote the album.
Wow.
Another interview in the Uncut magazine, Fripp says that although the band went on for another tour, couple tours, and another album, of course, in his mind, the band broke up.
Wow. Yeah.
During this album, even though they still went on for another 2 years. And I know there was a lot of pressure at this point with Adrian Belew because he was the singer. He was writing the lyrics. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
duties were not only being thrown at him, but when you've had a band that's sort of had a dictatorship, aka Robert Fripp, yeah, you're gonna have that tension because I'm sure looking at it from Adrian Belew's perspective, well, yeah, this is your band, but I'm the singer. My voice should be incorporated, and that's absolutely valid. But then you look at it from the other side with Freppo Pants, but this is my band. So
Yeah.
I that created a lot of tension, um, which I didn't even know was really something that happened during this era. And almost just reading up on it really makes me surprised that
Yeah, I think
Adrian Belew plays on the 3 albums after Three of a Perfect Pair.
yeah, it's very interesting. It got to the point where I read that Adrian Belew literally just ordered Robert Fripp out of the studio.
Which is crazy.
Yeah, he's just like, get out of here.
Like, how do you kick out the man who is King Crimson out of the studio?
Yeah, I think you summed that up very well. Yeah, I can totally understand both sides of the coin because it sounds like Adrian Belew was under a tremendous amount of pressure, and yeah, and at the same time, it is Fripp's band, so it sounds like there might have been a little bit, there possibly could have been a slight ego thing going on there, but for the most part, it just seemed mostly like a lot of pressure. Some people kind of bend and break under pressure, and so it sounds like there was a lot of that going on. And they'd also been touring a lot too in between here. So.
Yeah, they toured heavily for Discipline. But let's get into. I don't think there's really any point in introducing band members because, as we just established, this is the first.
It's the same lineup. So everybody plays essentially the same stuff.
Right. So let's get into it. Side 1, track 1, Neil and Jack and me. So as we just mentioned, this album is very heavily influenced by the Beat generation from the 40s and 50s. That sounds about right. And of course, Jack in the title is Jack Kerouac, and Neil in the title was his best friend Neil Cassidy, I believe. Yes, Neil Cassidy. Yeah, so I mean, this is a pretty good song. Not one of my favorites, but right off the bat here, we are hearing a more toned down version of Discipline. You can definitely hear just from this opening track,
yes,
that they are trying to go for a more commercial sound. What do you think?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's a bit more accessible than Discipline for sure. But I don't think it sacrificed the musicality of the record at all. And this track, yeah, I would agree. It's not my favorite, but I like it. It's not as strong of an opener as Elephant Talk was, but I still really enjoyed the track.
I would say, off the top of my head, thinking about it, weakest King Crimson opener to date.
Weakest to date.
Let's see. Take that back already. Circus was the opening track for Lizards. Yeah, no, don't care for that song. So never mind, I take that back. I know you probably disagree with me on that.
I would disagree, but hard to say. Possibly, yeah, possibly. Unless you count that the acapella thing in the Wake of Poseidon, which isn't like that great. So
yeah, that's a good point. I would still say I would take that over Circus, but I'm not gonna. We're getting sidetracked here.
I'd say the track's pretty good. I like it. I like what's going on instrumentally. The chorus is kind of nice. I like the song a lot. It doesn't blow me away. It didn't instantly grip me like Elephant Talk did, but I still really like it.
Yeah, I would agree with you. It's definitely, maybe that's where I'm getting at. Not so much weak as opener today, but just the first opener where it's not, like you said, doesn't grab you like Elephant Talk does, or even like thinking of like Rad or Lark's Tongues in Aspect Part 1. Like this band has always had strong openers. It's a good song. I like the chorus too. Yeah, I guess that kind of sums up my opinion on just not your typical album. opener
Same.
that brings you in. You know what I mean? But it's still a good song.
I would agree, and I think it's definitely growing on me a little bit. So we'll see. I have to listen to the album a few more times, but I did like it a little bit more each time I heard the album.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I would agree. However, track 2, I'm gonna say, don't like it. One of my least favorite King Crimson songs. Takes everything I just said about Neil and Jack and Me, where it's just very apparent that they're going for a commercial sound. If it doesn't tell you that with this song, then I don't know what other than a couple other tracks on this one. But this one does continue the sort of the beat theme. Heartbeat is the name of a book written by Neil Cassidy's wife, Caroline, who talks about her experiences with the beats. Tell you one thing, even though I don't like it, I guess Mr. Belew liked it enough to re-record it on one of his solo albums that he released later on. I'm not too sure which one it is. Excuse my lack of research, but yeah, this is not one I'm a fan of.
I actually really like this song.
Screw you. Screw you for having an opinion.
I don't know. I think it's a catchy track. I like what's going on instrumentally in it. I really like the chorus of it for some reason. I don't know. It's a cool, to me it's a cool track. I know it is definitely, it has a more commercial vibe for sure. It's kind of weird to hear sort of love song lyrics.
Yeah,
King Crimson album.
And look, I don't want to make it sound like I mean that in a negative manner when I say it's got a commercial sound. I've come to really grown and appreciate new wave music and a lot of campy 80s pop music. I'm a big defender of, David Bowie's Let's Dance. So I do love a lot of that.
Yeah, I love that album too.
I don't know. It doesn't work for this band. And I know, a very, I guess, a lot of people say that out of all of the 70s bands, that King Crimson was a band that definitely aged well with the 80s. I'm going to agree with that to a certain extent. I would say that's very much true with Discipline. Discipline definitely stands out among 70s bands that continued in the 80s, but really adapted well to the 80s new wave sound, whatever you want to call it, as opposed to bands like Yes and Genesis and tons of other bands I'm not going to list right now. But I think that only applies to Discipline. This is where we start to hear them fall under that Yes, Genesis trap, where it's just, I don't know, it's not working. That campiness is just not working with the King Crimson vibe. And you start to hear it on this track, in my opinion.
I'll say at first, I really, when I listened to this album, I wasn't a huge fan of it, but it's growing on me actually quite a bit, surprisingly. I don't know if it's, again, the wonderful Steven Wilson remix that's doing it, but there is a lot going on instrumentally underneath with all of these tracks that is very interesting. And I don't know, for some reason this one surprised me a lot. I actually really enjoyed Beat, and Heartbeat was, I thought, a really good track. I don't know if it's just that I enjoyed I think it's got like a nice kind of catchiness to it, which maybe doesn't work usually for King Crimson, but for some reason this track works for me. More so than Neil and Jack and Me, actually.
Interesting. Okay, fair enough. I love it. We're finally getting some controversy going on here, which I had a feeling was going to happen with this episode.
Yeah.
But let's move on to track 3.
Satori and
Tangier. I don't know why I threw in
you're right.
Italian accent, because I believe it's French.
Possibly.
But
I really, this so far, like, of the tracks so far, this was a big highlight for me. I loved this instrumental.
I thought that this was going to be a song you weren't going to like.
I really loved this one.
I do too. I do too.
To the point where it might be my favorite on the album, actually.
I wouldn't say it's my favorite, but it is it is a really good track. This is an instrumental I do like. There are, to me, two types of King Crimson instrumentals. There's the noodling, dare I say, sometimes pointless noodling, and then there are the instrumentals where we really hear them. We talked about King Crimson
Mm-hmm.
in the beginning of the episode, them being a band that embraces the technology of the time, and you hear that with this song. There's like
Yes.
this
Yes.
techno thing going on that I can't tell if that's Fripp's guitar. It sounds like it's his guitar, but I'm like, how do you produce that out of a guitar? you
Uh,
know?
the Frippo Pants is using Frippatronics. I think that's what it is.
Oh, good
It's
point. Yeah, I didn't
Frippatronics.
even
Yeah.
think of that. That's
Yeah.
probably you're right. That's probably what that is.
Yeah, this song's got a really cool vibe. It's a neat little piece of music. This is the first kind of inclination of this being the King Crimson sound on this album, in my opinion. It's a little bit experimental, but also still kind of accessible.
Yes,
It's
especially
just got a
accessible.
cool
I mean,
vibe to
again,
it.
that I talk about
Yeah.
with their instrumentals, especially that
Mhm.
that length, that time length. I think it's like in that 4.5 minute mark. Perfect. It doesn't overstay its
Yep.
welcome. It's a cool thing. Like you said, it's got that Crimson vibe, but in a way, something we haven't really heard before.
Yep. I enjoyed this one a lot.
Yeah, no, this one is definitely a great track. Yeah, maybe I take that back. Maybe I would put this among one of my favorites.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, speaking of favorites, actually, the track four may be my favorite. And if it's
Waiting Man.
Waiting Man, and if it's not Waiting Man, then it would be the track after that. But let's talk about Waiting Man first. I love everything about this song. This one kind of takes what I wish songs like Heartbeat were, as well as another track I dislike on this one. Um, I love the intro to this song. It's very new agey. Kind of reminds me of some of
Yes.
Peter Gabriel's first couple of solo records.
Did you also get a slight U2 vibe from it?
No, until you just mentioned that. And it's funny that you mentioned that because I've been really getting into U2 lately.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, no, this does kind of have like a early U2 vibe, like a unforgettable Fire War era U2.
I was listening to it and I was thinking that I was like, what does this remind me of? And it's got a hint of U2 in it, and I was like, interesting.
Yeah, no,
Very interesting.
I didn't think that until you just mentioned that, but absolutely. Shout out to you too, by the way, Peter Gabriel. But yeah, no, this like I said might be my favorite track off this one.
I love the rhythm in this
just how
track,
layered the rhythm and the instrumentation is. I mean, this to me, this is like my kind of pop music almost, and I guess now I'm kind of going back to U2, where there's that level of accessibility, but there's that intricate instrumentation as well too. This is something that could easily could have been released today for sure.
Yeah,
very
I agree.
modern vibe.
I completely agree.
And then I love at the end of the track, Fripp's guitar. It almost reminds me of like that guitar effect that he uses. We talked about Heroes before. Very reminiscent of Heroes and a lot of the stuff he did, the session work he did for Bowie.
Yeah, I could definitely see what you're saying too. There's some weird stuff he's doing with that Frippatronics on this whole album. This track especially, it's like you said, it's kind of got that weird. It's hard to, like you said, you made a good comparison with Heroes. It's got that weird, undescribable guitar sound that's Fripp,
Yeah, definitely.
Undeniably Fripp.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Fripp. Undeniably Fripp.
Undeniably Frippo Pants. Let's move on to Waiting Man closes side 1, and side 2, track
Neurotica.
5 opens up to Neurotica. This one might be my other contender, is my potential favorite off this one. This one I didn't really care for at first. It grew on me over the past couple of days going through all 3 of these records. Um,
Uh-huh.
I love Like Waiting Man. I love the opening of this song. We talked about, or I had mentioned that in Discipline, I love that like influence of the Talking Heads of like that paranoia. Um,
Mm-hmm.
how David Byrne approaches his lyrical approach with that paranoia sound, and I get that vibe off this track as well. Almost sounds like Adrian Belew is like on an acid trip. Is the vibe I get from this one. This track to me is kind of like Fela Hunjinji meets Indiscipline. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I also, again, with that instrumentation, I hear a lot of like Red Era KC as well too. What do you think about this one?
They they played this live when I saw
Oh, how
them.
did that sound?
He didn't. Jacko did not do the babbling kind of part. He just sung the chorus,
Yeah, and how did that
and it was
translate?
pretty good.
Because
It was pretty good. It wasn't like, again, as we discussed, it's hard to do Adrian Belew songs without Adrian Belew, in my opinion.
and I agree, and it's
And
not, and then I'm not bashing
yeah, I don't
Jacko
know.
because I stated on the
Yeah,
first episode I love his rendition of Islands. That suits well
yes.
for him, but the Adrian Belew stuff is just a lot more difficult to
Particularly this
approach.
era. Particularly this era, and we'll get into like the next episode. Of course, will be the most recent, if you can call like '90s and early 2000s recent, but the most recent cluster of King
Yeah,
Crimson albums. He can even do those pretty well. It's particularly this '80s period that it's just there's too much Belew in it to too much of that unique Belew style for it to
yeah,
really
yeah.
work. So I don't know. I didn't work for me. But as far as this track goes, I like this track a lot. The I don't know what he's going on about, to be honest. It almost sounds like some kind of weird, mad circus that he's talking about, but he's using like real life, or using a circus as like or like sideshow kind of thing, as a metaphor for modern day life. It's kind of really weird, but I like it. I like, again, instrumentally, I like what's
It
going
almost
on.
reminds me, like I said,
Um,
I mentioned how kind of to me sounds like Fela Hunjinji meets
yeah.
Indiscipline, but in terms of what the song may be about,
Yes.
it reminds me of Fela Hunjinji in that sense of just like life in the
Yeah.
city, you know.
Yeah. Heat in the jungle kind of. Yeah, I could see that
And
for
there's a
sure.
lot of
But yeah, it's
parallels with the
a pretty
city
good track.
and a jungle, where they're both
Yeah.
chaotic in that sense. So that's kind of the vibe I get. But it's one of my favorites.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, it's a good track.
whereas track 6 is one of my least favorites, Two Hands.
Hmm.
Um, you know, really, my opinion's not too different. It, to me, I really, my opinion on this song is the same with Heartbeat. I'm just not a fan of it. I think it's just too commercial sounding, and I know that does come off as being negative, but for this band, that just doesn't really
Kind of a dirty
work
word
for me.
almost.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
but the reason why I would probably put this one slightly above Heartbeat is I do like the little ambient part in the middle of the track. I kind of get some Fripp Eno vibes,
Yes.
a little bit. So there is some cool parts in this song, but overall, I'm not a fan of this one. I was reading in
It's not a remarkable track. It's very average in my opinion. It's not bad either, but it is kind of there's a nice cluster of tunes here, and this is kind of it dips a little bit. The album dips around this time
Yeah,
for me.
yeah, I would agree with that. I was reading in Uncut that I guess in retrospect, both Belew and Bruford have said that this song and Heartbeat, which, as I've mentioned already, are my two least favorites, they both felt that they shouldn't have been included on this album.
Yeah, yeah, I
Yeah,
kind of see that.
but I really,
Although I really do like Heartbeat for some.
no, thank you. Like I said, this one
That's
has a
okay.
little bit of more redeeming qualities to it, whereas Heartbeat, I'm gonna put that amongst my
Hmm.
least favorite King Crimson songs. But
Hmm.
I don't really have too much more to say about Two Hands. Yeah. So
Same.
let's move on then. Track
Howler.
7, The Hallower. So this one continues that beat sort of vibe. I guess this one's about the poem Howl, which Fripp has suggested apparently as inspiration for Belew with the lyrics. This one's okay. I'll take it over Two Hands and Heartbeat. Um, but at this point, we're sort of getting to repetition with these songs, which is not something that has been a problem with this band, at least in my opinion, up until this record. What do you think?
I like this track enough. I think it's better than Two Hands, but you're right. It's not quite remarkable. I definitely preferred. Like, I think the strongest part of this album is the middle part, as we talked about.
I would agree.
Particularly Satori and Tangier, Waiting Man, and Neurotica, and for me, Heartbeat as well. But this one was fine. It wasn't. I actually have to say that overall, I did enjoy each of these tracks more each time I heard it. So I think this album overall I need to listen to a little bit more than I have, because I've heard it a total of like 3 times. So I think before I pass judgment fully, I should listen to it more, maybe before we get to the very
Same,
end
and that's
of
something
this.
I meant to point out too, that before we do the last episode where we do our album rankings and our top 20 songs, I definitely plan on going through the whole catalog one last time. And I do
Yes.
think that with these 3 records, specifically, I know for me I had a very short time span listening to them, so I want to make sure I do give them their due justice when we do the final episode. I mean, when we recorded the first episode, I spent 2 weeks just listening to those first 4 records. And even episode 2, I spent a good week with those 3 records as well. Whereas this one, I didn't spend as much time. And I don't want to make it sound like I'm coming off as if like doing this podcast as a chore, because that would just totally contradict what we said in the beginning of the episode. That's not the case at all. But I do, again, want to make sure that I get, make sure these 3 get, really this 1 and 3 of a perfect pair get their due justice. But where I stand with it now, this one's just not doing it for me.
See, I'm a little different. I honestly really enjoy this album now. This album was a lot better than I thought it would be.
Well, before we get into it, I want to cut you off. Before we... let's talk about the closing track first before we get into our final thoughts.
This is, as I said about Discipline, this is the most King Crimson-y song on the album. There's apparently I believe it was this track they did to give Bill Bruford some room to kind of stretch his legs, because again, as I've said about Bill Bruford, he's very much about the musical side of it, and he needed a track where he could just kind of, do his thing, and I guess that was a big reason that they did this.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Which is kind of interesting, right? Yeah.
This is going to be one of the few instances where I actually would recommend the extended version of this one over the original album version. The extended version you can find on the 40th anniversary of Beat, but also it was released as a 50th anniversary single on iTunes. I don't know. I just, the extended version, if the extended version were included on this album, then I would maybe say that maybe Requiem's my favorite track, maybe. But yeah, this is I agree. This one's definitely the most reminiscent of Red era King Crimson, and you hear that with Bruford's playing specifically. But we also get a lot of, I'm going to go ahead and just assume again, Frippertronics. That's what it sounds like to me, at least.
Yes.
We did also mention at the start of talking about this album that there was a lot of tension with Adrian Belew and Robert Fripp, and that actually came from this song. With him kicking Fripp out of the studio, it was because of this song. I guess apparently originally it was just recorded with Tony Levin, Bill Bruford, and Robert Fripp, and then Adrian Belew later added guitar overdubs, and then Fripp went back and added more, and that just, I guess, what stirred the drama, um, and what led to, I guess, Belew kicking Fripp out of the studio. So I guess that's where a lot of the drama and tension started, was with this track. But yeah, no, this is a cool closer. There is some of
Yeah.
that noodling there, but I do like it for the most part. Again, I would oddly enough recommend the extended version over the original album version. And also apparently, and I guess I do kind of hear it, apparently this track was a tribute to John Coltrane. I don't know how true that is, but I definitely hear some like Love Supreme John Coltrane reference on this track.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah. Now,
Yeah.
see that I didn't
And
know.
also,
Wow. Yeah. I enjoyed this. I really enjoyed this track. It's kind of like, it was a cool way to end the album, because it was kind of like, hey, here's a taste of, King Crimson as it was, sort of thing. It in a way it doesn't really match the rest of the album, but that's also not necessarily a bad thing.
And apparently also
Yeah.
this song was the first King Crimson song to be nominated for a Grammy, which is totally random.
It was the first King
To be
Crimson song to
nominated
what?
for a
Sorry.
Grammy. So
That's
random.
so weird.
That means anything to you, because fuck the Grammys.
Yeah, it means
I
nothing to
figured,
me, but
but
that's pretty random.
yeah, I just thought that was a little random that this was the first King Crimson song to be nominated for a Grammy.
Did you want to get to the bonus tracks real quick? Because I have something to say about one of them.
Sure. Bonus tracks, B-sides. First one we have Absent Lovers, which I don't really know too much about. I wasn't really able to find a lot of information about this track. It's pretty cool. I don't really have a whole lot to say about it. I don't dislike it. But it's a neat track.
So when I listened to this album, because again, to refresh everybody, I assume you have been listening to all the studio albums on Spotify, and of course all the Steven Wilson remixes and everything. If this song had actually made the album, it'd be my favorite song.
Really?
Yep. Yeah, I think it's an instrumental. I think the musicianship on this track is fantastic. I love the rhythm, like the whole rhythm. I don't know. There's something about the way this song starts and the entire rhythm section of this song that I just absolutely love. Now, I don't think I've said this before, but I used to play bass, and I was in a band for a while, and I always notice rhythm first in songs for some reason. Like it's like the drums and the bass always stand out for the most part, and there's something about this track that I just absolutely love. I don't know why. I kind of wish
to go back and listen to it.
I wish this was on the album. I really wish this track had made the actual album, because it would have probably been my favorite track on the entire thing. But it isn't, so I won't count it in my top 3. But I just wanted to say that I really love this track.
Interesting. Okay, I'm gonna have to, like I said, go back and listen to it, because I maybe only really just in preparation for this episode listened to it twice. That's interesting, huh?
I thought it was part of the album when I heard it, because I'm just listening to the tracks, and then I went to look at the track list. I'm like, oh crap! I was like, that's not even part of the album.
See, it almost sounds like it could have been. I mean, maybe it's just it was recorded in the studio and it's just in demo form. But almost, to me, at first when I listened to it, it sounded like it was recorded live. I don't know, but maybe, like I said, it was just intended to be on the album, and what we're hearing is the demo version. But I'm definitely gonna have to go back and listen to that more. So we also have a live rendition of Neurotica / The Hallower. I only listened to that once. It was pretty cool.
Same, I listened to it as well.
Just once. Don't really have an opinion beyond that. It's there. Check it out. And then we talked about it already, but the extended version of Requiem, which is also on the 40th anniversary of Beat, but also was released as a 50th anniversary single. So I would highly recommend checking that out. But what are your final thoughts?
My final thoughts on this album was it certainly. First of all, it was a hard act to follow, with this being after Discipline, and probably the fact that there was tension in the band didn't help. But overall, I actually really enjoyed this record. I enjoyed it. like I said, listen to it twice. I might even go ahead and listen to this one again. But I'm very surprised how much I like this one. This one really did grow on me the more I heard it, and I think I'm going to listen to it a bunch more. And I think my opinion could very well change even more about this record. But yeah, this was a pleasant surprise for me, I'll say. And I know you've said that like something like Heartbeat and maybe Neil and Jack and Me and a couple of the other tracks on here have a bit too much of a commercial sound, but I kind of like it. I kind of like seeing what King Crimson would have sounded like a bit more commercial, and they're still very much undeniably King Crimson, but there is a there is a weird vibe to a lot of these tracks that I really enjoy, and I think some of them, like you said, especially something like Waiting Man, could very much be something that could be released today, especially with the current climate of like this 80s revival.
Yeah, absolutely.
Music. So I think it's definitely something that could be definitely released today. But I could see it being this album being slightly off-putting to a lot of King Crimson fans, but I don't know what it is. Again, it could be also the Steven Wilson remixes or me just really getting into the album for the first time, but I really enjoy this one.
So I guess if I haven't made it obvious enough already, my opinion is probably more or less the opposite to yours.
It's the first real difference then, so go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. This is the first King Crimson release for me it's bland. I think it tries to be a more accessible version of Discipline. We talked about the first episode with In the Wake of Poseidon and the similarities. At least I really do stand for that one. While there is some truth there, that they did try to do something different, whereas this one I don't feel that way. What I do like about this one is the beat concept, and I think it's a cool way of approaching a concept album, even though that's probably not what they were going for. But there definitely is a theme there, and I think it's a different approach with approaching a concept. Again, whether that's what they were going for or not, I don't know. But yeah, those two songs really, I hate them. I might hate them more than cat food. I mean,
hey, that's okay. That's okay. To each their own.
I would say, and this might hurt you a little bit, but as of now, this one's competing with Lizards as my least favorite King Crimson album.
Wow. See, that's so weird because this one really just, I guess it's just a difference of opinion. Like I said, maybe when we do our wrap up episode, our opinions will change even more as we listen to. Because I don't know about you, I'm gonna definitely as we do our wrap up, when we go to do our wrap up video. Not to get ahead of ourselves here, but I'm definitely gonna pay albums like this and Starless and Bible Black and a couple others that I can think of a lot more attention than some of the other albums that I know well, just so I can really give them their due by the way.
And that's what I was saying before too, and I'm going to do the same. This one being one of them, I'm going to make sure I give him more listens. Lizards will probably be another one. The next record we're going to talk about in a second will be another one. I'll make it a point. But yeah, just where I stand with it at this moment today, it's probably either this one or Lizards are my least favorite.
Wow.
King Crimson record. So
it's interesting that we have such a different opinion on this album.
Yeah, but I'm kind of glad too. I was really hoping that at some point we would drift apart on our opinions a little bit. It seems like we finally have. So tell me your top three before we move on.
All right, my top three would probably be since I can't include Absent Lovers as much as I would love to.
I'm going to go ahead and tell you can.
I can? Okay, so I'm going to include Absent Lovers, Sartori and Tangier, and probably Waiting Man. I'd say those three.
Okay.
And with the honorable mention to Heartbeat.
I kid. And I told you the reason why I told you that you could add Absent Lovers, by the way, because if I can clump together Lark's Tongues, part 1 and 2, then you can go ahead and add Absent Lovers to yours. I think that's fair. But
then I will graciously accept your offer, and you should listen to this one.
You fucking
so your homework, your homework, Andy, is listening to this again, and then listening to The Sheltering Sky, or watching the live version of The Sheltering Sky, because it's really great.
if you cut me off and ignore what I just said to you one more time, I don't know what I'm gonna do. Shut the fuck up.
Sorry,
Andrew.
what did you say? You've occasionally cut out too, so I might not have
I'm
heard you.
only
So
kidding.
sorry.
I know. Well, that's
Yeah.
because this wonderful technology that we have. But
Yeah.
my top three would be Waiting Man, Neurotica, the extended version of Requiem.
Cool. Requiem would be up there for me too. I really enjoyed Requiem,
Nice.
and the extended version is one I should listen to more. So, I'd say all your picks are really good as well.
Thank you.
Now, before we move on to the next section, do you mind if we take a bit of a break?
Yes, I gotta whittle myself. All right, so moving on to record number 3/10? Question mark? 10.
Yeah, I think it's 10. Yeah.
Album number 10. Three of a Perfect Pair. I made an error in my notes. It says released in 1981. That is false. It was released in March of 1984 on, once again, EG Records. And it hit number 30 on the UK album charts. Again, I couldn't come across any information as to where it stood on the US charts, but who cares? What's interesting about this one is the album is sort of a balance between discipline and beat. The two sides are actually referred to the left side, which is side one, and that's sort of the more traditional pop song, sort of in the vein of some of the beat stuff, whereas side two, which is also the right side, is more in the vein of the experimental side of discipline.
Yeah, Robert Fripp actually, specifically, I saw a quote from him, and he said, the first side is accessible, and the second side is excessive. That's what he...
Yeah, I think I read that quote too somewhere, which is a very, very Fripp quote. We once again have the same, same band members, Mr. Adrian Belew, Mr. Robert Sir Frippo Pants, Tony Levin, and Billy Bruford.
Tony Levin, like, you know,
Tony on the Chapman. I don't know what accent that was. So I
was referencing the Elton John song, you know the song "Leave On."
Oh yeah, great song.
He is Tony Levin. I don't know. Forget it.
Cut that out. This is not an Elton John podcast. This is King Crimson.
I'm just saying I would do an Elton John podcast, but I digress.
I'm just saying I would do an Elton John podcast too, but I too digress.
Okay.
Yeah. So Three of Perfect Pair. Let's see. I think the only thing with this one is Mr. Rhett Davies, probably not how you say his first name, is not on the production duties for this one.
So that's the main
record
change.
They went back to self-producing again.
Very interesting. Very interesting. I want to say real quick too, because we haven't talked about this on any of the other previous albums that we've talked about today. I like the minimalist covers of this and the other two albums. I also like that they're kind of different. It's interesting that they're different shades. Like there's you have the red Discipline album cover, the blue Beat cover, and the yellow Three of a Perfect Pair cover, and they're just little symbols, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, no, you're right. We didn't talk about that, and that's an interesting point. I like that too, and it kind of, on a visual level, but as well as the music on all three of these albums, really kind of makes it a trilogy. And I believe that the name of this record also ties that in too.
Yes.
I think I read somewhere that Adrian Belew, part of the inspiration for the name was tying in the other two records and really, looking at this as a trilogy of albums.
Yes. Much like how there was the trilogy of Lark, Starless, and Red, we have Discipline, Beat, and Three of a Perfect Pair, and again, kind of a lot of the same musical themes between the three albums.
Yeah, for sure. This one I would say out of the three of them, and we'll get into that more when we dab into side two, but this one I think has more reminiscence of the Crimson of old than even Discipline and Beat do. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. But that's more so in side two, so I don't want to get too ahead, but let's dive in. You ready?
Yes, I'm down.
All right, side one, aka the left side. I like this, by the way. I like that we are now naming. This might be the only record they do this, but REM does that. Each of their albums, they have a name for the two sides of the record. So that's just a weird thing that I think is pretty cool. But so side one, track one, we have the title track. Keep banging my freaking microphone. Three of a Perfect Pair. Now we're back in action with a solid opener. No disrespect to Neil and Jack and me. But this one, I really like this song. This is, I think, a great way to open the album. And again, we're getting some really excellent vocals by Mr. Belew. What do you think?
Yeah, and some interesting backing vocals, and it's weird to hear backing vocals like that on this track. I remember being kind of floored by that, actually. I'm like, wow, there's like a backing chorus in a way. It's kind of strange, you know?
Yeah. And I think, by the way, those backing vocals are done by Tony Levin. I could be wrong, but I think that is Mr. Levin there.
Yep, yes. Yep.
So this again, just listening to it, another love song, kind of sounds like it could be about a man and a woman. I get the vibe of like agreeing but contradicting each other's views as well. And what I like about that is it kind of ties into what I was just saying with the title, Three of a Perfect Pair. I feel like that this ties in not only the story of this song, but again, it ties in with the trilogy mindset of this, Beat, and Discipline. And sort of like the balance of struggle, which is very apparent on this record.
That was the theme they were going for with this record, from what I was reading.
Well, I don't think it was intentional, though. It wasn't an intentional theme. And we'll get into that a little more. We briefly mentioned with Beat how the struggle or the tension really started with Belew and Fripp. It's much more apparent here, but I don't think that was entirely intentional.
Well, I know that the symbol on the front is supposed to represent the contrast between... this is what I was reading about it yesterday, anyway. It's supposed to represent the contrast between masculine and feminine, and if you look at like the kind of upside down U shape, that's supposed to be like represent a phallic symbol, like going against kind of like a sort of feminine symbol, I guess, or what it's supposed to be. And then on the back cover, as you guys can see, there's this red line that goes through that's supposed to be a kind of balancing point. So yeah, I probably butchered the meaning of that a little bit, but it's along those lines. So
interesting. Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so there was a lot of intentional contrast, which I guess makes sense if you look at the two sides of the album too, and how different, like the stark contrast between them.
I didn't know that. Okay, but like I said, now that I'm staring at it, I totally see what you mean.
It says, and I just pulled this up here just for the heck of it. It says, the name of the album is based on the idea of perfect opposites and three sides to every story, or his, hers, and an objective truth. So that's what it is. So if you look at the cover, the bottom one is supposed to represent the his, the top, the hers, and then on the back with the red is the objective truth.
Oh, there you go. Okay, that's kind of more or less where I'm getting at with what the song is about too. So there you go.
Right. Yeah.
That just further validates that. Like I said, this is a really great track. It might actually be my favorite on the album, and just one of my favorites from this era of the band overall.
I really thought this was a strong opener too. I wouldn't say it's my favorite track on the album, but I really enjoyed it as well. Like I said, like you pointed out, his vocals are really, Adrian Belew's vocals are really great in this one. I like, again, the backing vocals. They're very, it's kind of a different sound, but I enjoy it. And as always, the instrumentation is top notch. So it's
always
strong opener.
Definitely. So let's move on to track 2, Model Man. And yeah, this one actually I really like too, and this one's been continuing to grow on me. So maybe we mentioned when we talked about Beat that some of these records, when we do our final episode, we're gonna, do justice, go back and listen to some of these, and I can maybe see this one becoming um, a favorite. But yeah, this one's great. This one's another one that clearly it's a love song of sorts. And I know I was kind of bashing on some of the tracks off the last record about how campy they were and whatnot, but I really like this one. And again, a shout out to Adrian Belew's vocal delivery. Um, yeah, just so good. This is another, to me, very
Yeah.
David Byrne sounding song.
This, yeah, I would agree with that. This is a really good song. I felt like it was a small step down from the first song for
Really?
me. I think I like Three of a Perfect Pair better,
Mm-hmm.
but I still enjoyed the track a lot. So that was my only thing. I felt like it was just a small step down. But yeah, otherwise I agree. Like you said, the vocal delivery is really good. And yeah, I would also totally agree with you that he's got a David Byrne kind of like delivery, I guess. Maybe I don't know how else to describe it, but like a David Byrne kind of sound, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. But I want to piggyback off of what you said, how this
Mm-hmm.
one doesn't do much for you, and that you like, Three of a Perfect Pair better, which I do agree. I like that song better, but it kind of, that right there just summarizes my feeling about not this album as a whole, but this side one. That
Mm-hmm.
now we're kind of reaching a point, kind of like we did with Beat, where, and I know that this was meant to be the poppier side. Now we're kind of reaching that repetition. Like these songs are not,
Yeah.
there's not that much differentiation amongst them compared to tracks on, say, like Discipline, for an example. So we're kind of, we're starting to reach redundancy here. And even though I think this track's a good song, as well as the next track, Sleepless, really there's not a whole lot of differences with these first three tracks.
I have to tell you though, I think Sleepless is the strongest track.
Really?
Sleepless stood out to me immediately. Yeah, I think it's better than the first two.
Okay.
So of the more poppier part, like I guess poppier or more accessible songs of the album, including, I don't want to skip ahead too quickly here, but of the first four tunes, I suppose you would say this is the strongest in my opinion, was Sleepless.
This one's been growing on me as well too, and I love that opening bass line from
Yeah, it's
from
so
Tony
good.
Levin. It's so badass.
Yeah.
There's
Tony
also
Levin
a
has
cool
some amazing
guitar
moments.
solo in the second half as well by
Yeah,
Sir Fripp.
I completely agree. I think Tony Levin has some amazing moments on this record, actually, and you're right that the intro to Sleepless is one of the big ones.
This one's cool too. What I like about it is thematically, it almost sounds like it could be like the sequel to One More Red Nightmare. It's I mean, as the title would apply, but if you listen to the lyrics as well too, it's clearly about that the person in the song is having a reoccurring nightmare. So that just made me go back to that song right away.
Well, see, now that I didn't put together, so now I'm gonna re-listen to that song again, and I'm with that in mind. So, yeah, I didn't even think of that, but it makes sense actually, from what you're saying. I'm gonna give that song another listen to now with that in mind.
Yeah, do that,
So now
and then
that's
listen
my
to the
homework.
20 different remixes that there is of this song too. Christ. So yeah, again, just to summarize, first three tracks overall, they're all solid tunes. We're getting to that point where there's a lot of similarity. I mean, I'm thinking about Discipline, and I'm thinking about those first three tracks and just how vastly different they are. But
Yes,
you can
yes.
tell it's from the same band. It's, I don't know, but here we go with track 4. Man with an Open Heart. Fuck this song. It is in that vein of why am I blanking out on the Heartbeat? There you go, Heartbeat and
Heartbeat.
Two Hands, but probably even worse for me at least.
I thought this was probably the weakest track as well, to be honest. It isn't. I don't think it's a bad song. I don't hate the song. I kind of like the hook a little bit, but yeah, not my favorite.
It's just it's we talked about earlier in the episode, campiness. It's the '80s. I get all of that, and I can even I really do appreciate all of that. But there is a fine line, and for me at least, they really do cross the line with this track. I'm not digging it. I mean, the melody's fine, the vocals are fine.
This might be the weakest track of this entire era.
I 100% agree with that.
And it's not, and like I said, I don't hate the song. Like I did not dislike any, like, believe it or not, like I didn't dislike any of the music I've heard from these three albums, really. But there's definitely weaker ones, and this is certainly probably the weak point for me.
Yeah, no.
The album really dipped right here for a second, but
see, I want to say only for a second. I think it continues to dip on side 2, but we'll get into that in a second. I don't really have anything more to add on to Man with an Open Heart, other than, like I said, it's my least favorite track.
Yeah, I would say it's mine too. I think we can definitely agree on that.
Yeah, for sure. So
especially after how good Sleepless was, in my opinion, because Sleepless really I thought was a really solid track, and this kind of floundered a bit,
Yeah. So let's move on to track 5, Nugs, That Which Passes Like Clouds. This one grew on me, similar
Same.
to, boy, am I blanking out, similar to the one instrumental off of Beat that we both really liked, the French one.
Oh, yeah, you're talking about Satori in Tangia.
Yep. Similar to that one, how it not only grew for me, but I love this, like, whereas that track had more of like a techno sound to it, this sort of has like a industrial vibe to it. And almost from what I remember of the 90s period of King Crimson, this almost sounds like foreshadowing to what's going to come on the next few records,
I actually think this whole side really this is the last track on the first side, but starting with this and then the whole rest of the album, I think, really does foreshadow the next period of the band's history, which wouldn't be for another over 10 years.
Yeah. Well, 10 years they got back together, 11 until the next album. But this one's cool. It also does remind me of some of the stuff Eno did in the early 80s, and a little bit of, again, we mentioned that Fripp Eno stuff in the mid 70s. I get some of that vibe as well too. But this is just a neat track. I feel like this one will continue to grow on me as we have more subsequent listens of this album.
This one is a contender for my favorite instrumental on the album. It's a contender. I really, really enjoyed this track. I thought it was. I didn't think. I know how you have said, and I agree with certain instrumentals. Sometimes they're too long and they're too noodly. I don't feel that way with this track. I feel like this track is good enough. Like it's a digestible enough length, and I think it's interesting, and I think it's experimental and interesting enough where it retains my attention.
Same, and I was going to make that point too. I do agree. It's just like how I felt about the fucking French song from Beat. Same thing. Yeah. How I just it doesn't overstay its welcome. It's short enough where the interest level is there, and it doesn't go on too long. It's a cool track.
And the advantage this track has, to be fair, is that it's the first instrumental on the album, so you've just listened to basically 4 more accessible songs, and this is the first really experimental one. So you don't have that baggage where the last maybe few tracks of this album have, where you're mostly saturated with instrumentals on the second half of the record. So you know what I'm saying? You're not fatigued by the other instrumentals. So I think this track benefits from that a little bit too. To be fair.
Yeah. No, I would agree. And interesting enough, whereas this track benefits from its time length, I don't feel that way about track 6, which opens side 2, the right side. And that, of course, is Industry. This one is a cool one. It does start out heavy KC again, the Red era. But it's just too long. This is one, and I mentioned this in the beginning of the episode, this is one where I think the live version is the superior version. I was listening to Absent Lovers yesterday, which is one of King Crimson's many live albums. But this one was actually the last show that they did before the band broke up in the 80s. And a lot of the tracks off of this album alone, I think the live versions are the superior versions, especially the live version of Industry.
I really like this track. I would agree with you that it could be a little shorter, but I love the dark industrial sound of it. I really am a big fan of a lot of avant-garde music. Some of it can be tedious for sure. This one I think is good. I think you're right that it could stand to be a little shorter, and I'm kind of interested now to hear the live version. You having said that, so again, more homework for me.
Yeah, no, definitely check out the live version. One thing I really do like about this song, though, and I don't think we really mentioned this at all during the episode. You might have a little bit, but with this track, we really hear Bell Bruford's hybrid kit. When I say hybrid, during this era of the band, he had literally his drum kit consisted of both acoustic drums and electronic, of course, hence hybrid drum kick. But it really stands out here. You hear both the acoustic drums, but you hear the electronic stuff too. It's just a really neat contrast, and you hear it in this song really well.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the percussion in this track a lot, and Tony Levin does some pretty interesting stuff as well. Excuse me. Ugh. I again, as I've said many times, the Bruford Levin rhythm section is probably the best.
Yeah,
excuse me,
absolutely.
I don't know what's going on here. Too much seltzer. I'm bubbly here.
So track 7, Dig Me. This is actually the only song on this side that isn't an instrumental. I do understand why it's on this side. But this one has been another grower for me. Here I go again, contradicting myself. But this is a song that I wouldn't mind it being a little longer, just to see where they could continue to go with, the instrumentals. That industrial sound is still very much reminiscent of Industry and Nugs, as well as the last 2 tracks as well. And lyrically, this is an interesting one too. I can't help it if this one is a metaphor. I mean, he's clearly referring to a car during this song, and I should have pulled the lyrics up, but you read the lyrics and it almost sounds like the car is a metaphor to an actual person.
Yeah, it kind of does. I don't know if it's supposed to be. I was wondering that too about the lyrics. It's got like a, like, is it talking about, are the lyrics talking about some person who, I don't know, maybe an elderly person who is kind of at the end stages of his life?
That's the vibe I got. I'm trying to pull up the lyrics now.
It's kind of weird. But as far as the sound of the song, I really like it. It kind of blends the pop side with the heavy, dark, industrial side, and I love the effect on Belew's vocals. I don't know what that is, but he has almost like a mechanical sound to his voice, which is really interesting. And the drums are very very, very how do I want to describe it? Very metallic sounding as well. It's weird. Like I would call this a very metallic, industrial kind of a song. It's really, really interesting. I really liked this one.
Yeah, I would agree. Like I said, this one has been a continual grower for me, and who knows, maybe over time this could end up being my favorite. Again, this is a neat track.
Not to get ahead of ourselves, but this is a track that could easily fit on an album like Thrack. It would be fit just fine along with a lot of the songs.
I don't know Thrack very well, so I'm not gonna put my opinion on that. But just from couple tracks I do remember. I guess I could probably see that.
You can really see, especially in the song, where King Crimson goes in the future in the next album. Even though it's 10 years earlier, there's still like seeds of it, which
Okay.
is very interesting. You know, I kind of didn't expect that with this album, because this is probably an album I was really less familiar with than almost any other album in their whole catalog. So it was kind of a surprise for me.
So this is, now that we move on, this is where we kind of start to hit discipline again, in that we end with two instrumentals again. And with this one, it's even, I don't want to say worse, but it is, because now we've had two other instrumentals already, and we had this one track, even though I really like, it's still kind of, a little abstract, a little more out there. So to follow it up with, more or less instrumentals that are kind of identical to the two prior ones, not a good way to end the record.
So I agree. Yeah.
No Warning. I just, other than Man with an Open Heart, of course, would be my least favorite track. I mean, of course, my least favorite of the instrumentals, but it just doesn't really go anywhere.
Yeah. It's just kind of unremarkable, you know? It's not like... I felt like Industry, and especially Nuages, or however you pronounce it,
yeah,
were a lot more interesting than No Warning. It just didn't stand out to me, you know?
Yeah.
I appreciate, again, I love the dark industrial sound. It's really creepy. I feel like I was thinking when I was listening to this whole side of the album, and particularly when I actually got to this track, I was like, on its own, this track isn't remarkable, but like I can see some of this, or like some of the tracks, especially like this one and maybe Industry, being really cool backdrop to some to like a movie, like to some, you know what I'm saying? Like I feel like these would fit well for like a movie soundtrack, like some kind of dark concept, maybe like some weird post-apocalyptic sci-fi
almost like
movie.
like a David Lynch movie.
Yeah, something like that's a really good good example. But something like that. I could see some of these tracks being kind of a cool little, like, creating a cool kind of atmosphere, ambiance in a weird movie like that. More so than just listening to it as an album,
Interesting. Yeah, now you're making me want to listen to this and a couple other tracks on their own, separate from listening to it in the context of the album. But I see what you mean, though. That's interesting.
It would be kind of cool to see somebody do some kind of film or some kind of make like a quote unquote music video, if you will, with some dark imagery and some some.
There you go. Somebody get on that.
Yeah, somebody get on. I don't know. I just conjured that in my head. I was thinking like, man, this would be cool for like a really dark sci-fi or something like that.
Oh, there you go. And then we close with Lark's Tongues and Aspic Part 3. And what's neat about this, hence why it's called Lark's Tongues Part 3, is it opens with that same melodic motive that's seen in both parts 1 and 2, but of course the rhythms and the tones are pretty different, more in the vein of this era of the band. Again, we hear hybrid drum kit, the acoustic and the electronic drums. But this one's cool, and this one's definitely, like, it's definitely, you hear it's in the vein of the first two. I would say the first two are definitely better in my opinion, but this is kind of like a neat. I think of this, and when listening to it, it's like, what this is like. This is almost like this era of the band paying tribute to the prior band, previous era, is what it sounds like to me.
It's kind of like the track Requiem on the last album. It's just kind of shades of the King Crimson that was, paying homage to that, kind of as you're saying. It's good. My thing is like if if you're going by the name Larks, Tongues, and Aspic, it's not nearly as good as the first two pieces that are on the actual album, Larks, Tongues, and Aspic.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's not right to compare them. But by this point of the record, I think I was feeling just slightly fatigued on some of the instrumentals, so I don't think I appreciated it as much as I probably should have, you know. But,
I was thinking this morning, I think I mentioned this in one of the other episodes, something I've really gotten into the last couple of years, and it's just, it's totally nerdy, and I acknowledge that, is resequencing albums. And I just had the idea, and I think it's going to be something I'm going to try to accomplish and reveal it in the next episode, the beginning of the next episode. I think I'm going to attempt to do a resequencing consisting of my favorite songs, the songs I think that are the best off of Beat and the Three of a Perfect Pair. Because
cool idea.
There is a solid album there that would either be on par with Discipline or possibly even better.
I see. So you're saying between the different tracks on both albums, you take the best of both albums into one album, is what you're saying?
Correct.
That's an interesting concept. I like that idea. I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to...
there you go. That's what we should do. In between this episode and episode 4, we both should come up with our own sequencing. We can only use songs. You can use B-sides and other stuff too, because I know you're going to probably want to include Absent Lovers. We should both come up with our own album, a what-if scenario.
I kind of like that idea.
And then we'll reveal it in the beginning of episode 4.
By the way, sorry to you guys, to anybody who watches this who are enormous fans of these two albums, but I think, at least for the purposes of our podcast, we can agree that, and we'll get to that. Well, I guess we should wrap this album up real quick, and maybe we'll get into that a little bit more. But I think you and I can both agree that Discipline is leagues beyond the other two.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah. But anyway, maybe we should wrap up the album first, and we'll get further into this.
Into our crazy idea that we just suddenly came up with. Yeah, so let's.
I love this idea. Go ahead.
So let's just quickly dive through bonus and B-side stuff. First one, I don't know if you listened to this. This is kind of silly, but it's there. It's called The King Crimson Barbershop, and
this was great.
This one. Interesting enough, was all done by Tony Levin, so all the vocals are Tony Levin. Listen to it just to hear it, but it must have been used to either promote this album when it came out or the tour, because there is a line that actually did have me crack up where they say, "We don't play 21st century schizoid man."
Yeah.
So I guess if anything, it was probably recorded to promote the up and coming Three of a Perfect Pair tour. So that was kind of cool. There's also industrial. Go ahead.
Can I say before you move on? When I first went to listen to this on Spotify, I saw that. I was like, all right, I've got to hear this first.
So you did listen to it?
Yeah, and I was like, what is this? It was so good. And at first I was wondering, I was like, wow, is that all 4 members of the band singing? Because I was like, honestly, like Bill and Robert Fripp didn't sound too bad.
I know, that's what I thought too. But
I researched it, and I was like, oh, okay, it was all Tony Levin. Interesting.
Which is very random, but also cool at the same time.
Yeah, I thought it was funny.
Yeah, no, I did too. So there's also Industrial Zone A, and I had a hard time really finding information about this song. To me, it sounds like an early take of Industry, but I'm probably wrong with that. There's also Industrial Zone B, which is longer. This track was okay. It was kind of cool. Again, reminded me of Red era King Crimson. There's also Industrial Zone C. This one I could not find. It wasn't on the Spotify version of Three of a Perfect Pair. And then I tried to find it on YouTube, and I couldn't find it on YouTube either, but it's included on the 40th anniversary version of Three of a Perfect Pair, and it's also pretty long too. I think it was like 15 minutes or something like that. I forget.
I skimmed through all these, but I think I was kind of just by the end of the album was just mildly fatigued and wasn't really ready to hear too many instrumentals. But I do like that. I do like that these all look like Sonic the Hedgehog levels, you know, Industrial Zone A and B.
I didn't even think of that.
It made me think of Sonic the Hedgehog. I was like, nice.
And then there's, for whatever reason, 3 different mixes of Sleepless. I'm gonna be honest with you. I only listened to the Tony Levin mix because, like you just said, at that point I was just feeling so fatigued. I was like, am I really gonna listen to Sleepless versions, 3 other times? But there's a version that was mixed by Bob Clearmountain, who is also a producer and engineer. He's worked with Stone, Springsteen, Toto, Bon Jovi, Bryan Adams, and several other people too. And then there's a Francis Kevorkian dance mix, probably not saying that last name right. I didn't really find a whole lot of information on him. I guess he's a DJ, also a producer. Maybe I'll check out those 2 mixes eventually, but like you said, at that point I was like, no, I can't. I'll acknowledge that they exist, but I don't want to hear this right now.
Yeah. So what are your top? I guess we should do our final thoughts in our top 3. What do you think your top 3 are for this one?
My top 3 would be, honestly, it would probably see that, but then there's Dig Me. For now, I would say 3 of a Perfect Pair, Model Man, and Dig Me.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Mine would probably be Sleepless, Nuages, I guess, however you pronounce that one. That Which Passes Like Clouds, and I think I'm gonna go also Dig Me with this one for now. Okay. And I'll tell you my logic with my list here. I like the instrumental industrial side, and I like the quote unquote poppier version. And I think Sleepless is the strongest of the more, accessible side. I'm gonna stick with my guns and say that Nuages is the strongest instrumental.
That I would agree with.
Dig Me is an interesting hybrid of both sounds. So that's where my logic is going with this, and I just truly enjoyed those 3 tracks a lot.
Interesting. So. All right.
And I also say Industry was a contender for me too, except I just wish, like you said, I think it could have stood to be a little shorter. But otherwise, I really did enjoy that track too.
All right.
That one was kind of a grower for me too.
So, final thoughts.
My final thoughts on this album was I really did enjoy it a lot more than I thought. As I did with Beat, I actually have kind of a new appreciation for both of these albums. As I know I've said that for pretty much all the King Crimson albums, but I really think a lot of credit goes to Steven Wilson for all these remixes. There's something he does to these albums that makes them more pleasurable to listen to. But overall, these 2 are still, when you compare them to Discipline, are a bit, disappointing. But I think that there's a lot here with both of these albums that's good stuff. And I think you're right. I think there's one really, really great King Crimson album between all the stuff from these two records. And I love this idea of making a hybrid record, three of a perfect beat. How's that sound?
So I think I thought of a name, and I took the 3 out, and just a perfect beat.
A perfect beat?
A perfect beat.
Oh my god, amazing. I love it. So here's what we're also going to do. Okay, so we're going to each do what we think was a good album, and we're both going to make Spotify playlists. And what I'm going to do, guys, is in the next podcast, after this, I'm going to put it in the description below in the on the YouTube video. I don't know if I can do it on SoundCloud, I'll have to see. But I'll have links to the Spotify playlists that we make, and you can hear Andy and Rob's A Perfect Beat.
Yeah, I think that would be really cool.
Yeah.
Like I said, and this was just kind of, I literally came up with this idea this morning because, and just to quickly give my final thoughts on 3 of a Perfect Pair. Definitely, there are stronger songs here as opposed to Beat, but my feelings kind of lie the same as with Beat in that it's just, the sequencing's a mess, and it's not it's not cohesive. I understand the left side, right
Yes.
side concept, but I don't know. It didn't really work well, at least in my opinion. Um, and that's when I was thinking about that. That's when I came up with this idea of coming up with. So I think it's cool that you're doing it too. Coming up with
Mm-hmm.
my own sequencing of taking tracks off Three of a Perfect Pair and Beat, because as I did say, I do think there is a great album there that at the very least
Mm-hmm.
would be on par with Discipline.
I completely agree with you.
So
Yes.
let's do
I think
that.
it'll
We're
be
going to put
really
that
interesting.
together in between episodes. Episode 4, of course, will be covering the last 3 records, but we'll make sure we do allow some time to reveal our um, a perfect beat.
A perfect beat. I love it. That's a great it's a great title for it. So before we wrap this up, how would you order these albums in preference?
For me, obviously, Discipline would be number 1. Um,
Yeah, I think we're agreed there. I think it's more so which of the two is the other two you like
yeah,
better.
I would give it slightly to Three of a Perfect Pair, and then Beat would be my number
Mm-hmm.
3.
I think I'm actually I it's very close for me, but I honestly think I liked Beat
Okay.
better. I think as a cohesive album, I think Beat is much more easily digestible. And overall, I just enjoyed the album more. I think I have a more of an appreciation for Beat. But I think that it's possible that could change. So, but for me, it's definitely I guess the order that they were released: Discipline, Beat, and then Three of a Perfect Pair.
Yeah, and like Larks, Starless, and Red, these 3 are definitely a trilogy in that sense.
Yes.
And
I think this is a very strong trilogy as well overall, compared to maybe some other ones in the past, except for possibly the Lark Starless Red era.
yeah, for me, where I stand now, as much as I love this reinvention of the band, for me, it still stands that the Wet and Bruford Cross Fripp era is still my favorite. But you know
Mm-hmm.
what? Maybe over time, the next month, as we wrap the series up, that could change. Um,
Yeah.
there's definitely a lot of greatness spread out amongst these 3 records. Some of
Mm-hmm.
really King Crimson's best material up to this date. I
Mm-hmm.
do highly recommend checking out Absent Lovers, the live album I was referring to
I'm gonna
before.
check that out.
And that's a
Mm-hmm.
good documentation of how solid this band is live, because I do think, even though you do hear on record how great this band is, with the Red era of the band, listening to those albums, you hear like this is a live band. Whereas with this band,
Yes.
probably that's just because there is that more of that pop approach. You
Mm-hmm.
don't really, it's not that you don't hear it, but just listen to some of the live material from this era. Like really, like this band is on par, if not in some
Oh,
ways better than
I
the
agree.
Red era.
It's like what I was telling. It's like I agree. It's like what I was telling you about with Sheltering Sky. I had a new appreciation for that piece when I saw them play it live. So I don't doubt that. I think Absent Lovers. Is there a video companion to that?
Um, there's a DVD. It's a different show. I think it's actually called Neil and Jack and Me.
Uh
Um,
huh.
but I guess that would essentially be the video companion.
Interesting. I have to
Yeah, me
watch that
too.
and see how that is too. Because even watching them play live is also another experience in itself. But that being said, we're running out of time here, so maybe we should wrap this up.
Yeah.
Um.
So wow, it's hard to believe that we're through 3 episodes already. But again, guys,
Yeah.
please, listen, comment, share your opinions. Don't be a douchebag about it. We do want to hear your opinions. We do want to hear your feedback. Something that we both greatly appreciate. And yeah,
Yep.
until next time.
And next time we're gonna jump ahead 10 years in time and go to the next period of King Crimson, which should be very interesting.
Yeah, if it wasn't obvious, we enter another hiatus, but we'll get into that more in the next episode. We'll, just like we did for this one, we'll go over the what was going on in between this era and the next era of the band.
And speaking of hiatus, there may be a bit more of a gap between this podcast and the next podcast, both because Andy here is going on vacation. I'm also going to be pretty busy. I got some company coming, and I'm going to be seeing Iron Maiden, so that'll be cool. And we also just have a lot to do. We both have to listen to all three of those albums quite a bit, and we're going to resequence the tracks from these past two albums. So there might be a little bit of more of a gap between this podcast and the next podcast, but be patient. We will be back, and we'll be wrapping this series up pretty soon already, believe it or not.
Yeah, which is crazy to believe. But we're looking forward to that. I'm really looking forward to the final episode with our rankings, and I can't wait to do the next series as well too. We've gotten the next few bands picked out, so I'm very much looking forward to doing that further down the road.
Yeah, I'm excited too. And with that, guys, we appreciate you guys watching as always. Hope you guys found this interesting, and I guess we'll see you guys next time.
Until next time. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys. Peace.